The hero thinks that a person should not do something that he has not done from time immemorial, who could even know what the work that his colleague offered him would lead to. He recalls how the doctor said that he was assigned to volunteer medical services and called Nick Peterson to go with him. He refused, but in the end, he was signed up for this work. Nick still can't understand how it happened that a civil war would break out in the place they were sent to, but he gave it his all. One day, rebels came to their base unnoticed. Doctors and wounded were hiding in a tent and did not know what to do. Nick tried to protect the little boy. He shielded him from the bullets with his body. The boy called Dr. Peterson, but he was already somewhere far away in his thoughts. He was thinking about his duty, about life and death. He had the feeling that bones were being broken, and he heard the crack of his own skeleton. And then he began to fall. Nick understood that this was death. Nick woke up in the forest. He does not understand where he is, why he is lying on the ground, and what happened to him. He examines his child's hand, sees blood, again asks many questions, but understands that he simply died. Peterson examines his body. He does not understand what is happening at all and thinks that he is in a dream. The main character sees a bunch of corpses and broken wooden carts around. The boy is shocked, decides to pinch his cheek, and make sure that he is not in a dream. Looking at the corpses and smelling real blood, he realizes that everything is real, that this is not a film set or a fantasy. Nick notices deep wounds and strange clothing on the corpse. Peterson realizes that he is in the world of martial arts. Peterson assumes that the carts were attacked by thieves. He notices stiffness in the muscles of the face and neck of the corpse and concludes that approximately 2 hours have passed since death. He gets up and decides it's time to recover from the shock and get out of here before the robbers return. Nick is about to leave when he suddenly hears someone calling out to him. He quickly turns around and walks towards the survivor. He hands him some kind of bag and says something about his wife and child. Peterson ignores this and examines the victim's wound, then reports that he was lucky and is going to stop the bleeding. He looks for a needle and thread, warns the guy that it will hurt, but there is no way out and begins to stitch up the wound. Nick, satisfied with his work, tells his patient that he did well, he behaved well, and he thanks him. He says that unfortunately, he doesn't even have antiseptic, so there is a risk of infection. Then he notices the booties in the hand of the survivor and says that this is unlikely to help him, but he has faith that his pregnant wife is waiting for him. Peterson notices that he is very tired and concludes that his new body is too weak and has no endurance at all. He gets up and decides to look for more survivors because there are definitely some and only he can help them. He is overcome by doubts. He does not understand what to do next because no one will come for them. But he decides to leave these thoughts and help people since this is his medical duty. Nick examines the bodies and discusses how working in surgery is all about knowing who can be saved and who is beyond use. As a result, he selects 3 surviving people who are not too late to help. Realizing that he does not have proper medical equipment, he despairs, lowers his head, and notices a handkerchief that belongs to the Flying Snakes. This organization is engaged in escorting anyone, anywhere for a good fee. Nick knows that similar transport companies are found in novels about martial arts, and begins to understand where he is. Peterson reflects that if he really is in such a place, then these people are guards, and then a rescue squad should definitely come for them. Dee tries to sharpen his sword and is glad that at least somewhere his army knowledge was useful. Nick carries heavy objects and injured people and complains about the weakness of the body in which he finds himself. After a long time, Peterson was able to build a spacious tent and drag the survivors there. He collapses from fatigue, decides to rest lying right on the ground, and wonders why he suddenly decided that they would be saved. Peterson becomes desperate. He realizes that he became a surgeon only for the money and that he is not interested in this profession at all. Then he went somewhere and eventually died, shielding civilians. And now he's generally in some kind of mess. Here some sounds distract him from his sad thoughts. He thinks that they are wolves and is very worried about this. A few minutes later, he realizes that someone is approaching his tent. Nick goes outside, holding a sword in his hands. The boy sees the flags of the flying sword and understands that salvation has come, sits down on his knees, puts down the sword, and waits for help. Soon a bunch of people on horses and carts approach him. He pays attention to one of them and realizes that he has seen her somewhere. Peterson falls into memories, where in his old body he read another novel about martial arts. It was called The Greatest Demon of Heaven. Nick realizes that the carriage is exactly like the one in the novel and decides that it is just a coincidence. Adam Clark approaches the boy, who introduces himself as the head of the flying kite. Nick only thinks about how big this man is. Adam asks Peterson to introduce himself. He sees him as a kind person and tells him his name. Clark praises the boy for showing resilience in such a situation and asks if he made the tent himself. Nick replies that yes, and reports that there are survivors inside. Adam is very surprised and looks into the tent. Peterson yells to his people that they need emergency help and asks them to bring up the same cart with Chris Fern. Nick is shocked. He can't believe his ears, because he met this very name in the very novel where this strange cart was. According to the greatest celestial demon, Chris Fern is one of the healers of 3 generations of the Celestial Empire. Nick remembers the man's hair, reminiscent of the scales of a white dragon, and the fact that although he was a man, many saw him as a lovely beauty. Peterson looks at the man who got out of the cart and realizes that he is 100% similar to the hero of the novel. He realizes that he is not just in the world of martial arts, but in the universe of that very book. Nick begins to analyze the greatest demon of the sky, where one of the important supporting roles belonged to Chris Fern. When the transport guard was attacked, he saved the main character, Jack Reed. After this, there were many episodes in the book, and eventually Chris died of a chronic illness in the 2nd volume. But now this book character is right in front of him, and examining the bodies of the survivors, Nick does not believe it. Chris at this moment is examining the body of the man to whom Peterson stitched. The doctor is surprised to see him. Fern applies a white cloth to the injury. His body sparkles with blue lightning. At that moment, Adam comes in and asks if the victims will survive. Chris, pointing to the seam, asks the head who sewed them up. He is no less surprised than the doctor. Nick comes out from the crowd and says that he did it. Chris notices that he has unusual surgical skills for his age. The Flying Kites people discuss who this boy is, how he was able to sew up a man, and are surprised that Chris Fern himself praised him. Nick says that he just wanted to save people's lives. The squad praises him, then half leaves somewhere. Clark approaches the boy and says that he will definitely thank the little hero for his good deed. The coals crackle quietly and measuredly in the fireplace, and the kettle on top is already beginning to boil. The guy says that Chris Fern should not have gone there. He says that he had no other choice, because in the past there, he was helped to hide from the wrath of his family. And today, he repaid the debt, saved the son of the head. The servant anxiously says that the doctor does not take care of himself and his health at all, because it is not easy to recover from something like this. Chris notes that he himself knows this very well, but he doesn't have much time left anyway. The red-haired guy doesn't like it very much. He asks him not to talk like that anymore. The man says that he wants to take that boy as his student, because he definitely has talent. The guy hints that this will make his life even shorter, but he doesn't dare contradict. Nick Peterson, half asleep, smelled a familiar smell. It seemed like some kind of medicine that he knew in a previous life. He tries to get up, but Chris, who is nearby, says that he should stay in bed. The boy opens his eyes and sees many people in front of him. He is tensed by such close attention to his person. The main character finally plucks up courage and asks where he is now. Fern says that the boy is in one of the sections of the Flying Kite, because he lost consciousness and they decided to give him a rest. He slept all the way here. He also adds that if it weren't for his help, people would have died. The doctor finished the treatment, but their savior, without a doubt, is Nick. The guy can't believe that he is so polite that he addresses him on a first-name basis. Chris smiles sweetly and says that complications were avoided, so not only the Flying Serpent, but also the Conson clan are in his debt. He wonders if Nick remembers the girl with the sword whom he treated. She was the daughter of the Conson family. The guy remembers that this family appears later in the plot, and this is the daughter of the head of the family. The main character still gets out of bed and says that he was just using his modest skills, but was very happy to help. Nick is given some kind of box. It contains medicine for internal injuries, which was sent to him as a token of gratitude. Everyone in the area is surprised to see the contents of the box, because it contains a rare and valuable medicine. There turns out to be a yellowish pill called Huandin of a 100-year-old pine. The contents are obtained from a pine tree that grows in special places. The resin is extracted from the roots, and then added to this, the energy of a 100-year-old tree is contained inside. Chris notices that everyone around is surprised by such a gift, and he himself thinks that maybe that family does not believe that the child saved them. But this, in fact, is so. And knowing the situation of that girl, one can even say that this is not enough, but only few people can understand it. Fern says that this medicine is good against internal injuries and also relieves headaches, and the child is now overtired and the body is having a hard time, so it would be just the right time to take it. Nick thinks that a lot of things relate to internal injuries. Is it really a miracle drug? Well, the patient must listen to the doctor, so he needs to take it. After taking the medicine, a pleasant chill runs down your throat and you feel slightly dizzy. The servant also gives some kind of bottle that will help you sleep. The doctor says that the patient needs peace, so he asks everyone to leave. The people begin to disperse. Chris understands that this child is much more unusual than it seemed at the beginning. He even feels somehow embarrassed by the memories of their uneducated children. The guy asks if the doctor really wants to take this boy as his student. He firmly says that yes. The servant says that no one will refuse to become a student of such a person, but something still bothers him. The doctor wants to give his needle to the boy if he does not agree, to show sincerity, but the red-haired guy shouts that this is a very rare thing. Chris sticks some kind of needle into the boy's forehead, which literally oozes with energy. The guy behind does not know to envy or sympathize, since the owner noticed him. Then he can't count on a peaceful life. In a dream, the boy dreams that he is a butterfly that fell into the hands of a madman who pierced his body with needles. He begs to be released so that this will end as soon as possible. The guy wakes up without clothes and screams in confusion about what happened. Chris and a servant appear. They notice that the guy has already woken up. The doctor thinks that, usually, servants look after the sick. The main character feels that something is unpleasantly stuck to his back and smells bad, and DeFern praises his physique and says that he does not have much unclean energy. The boy asks to address him informally, because he is extremely embarrassed when people address him informally. The doctor says that he removed the unclean energy from him. It would be better for him to remember how this will be very useful when studying martial arts. The servant carries the main character to wash himself, and he thinks that Chris must be doing a very high-quality cleansing. Why is he so kind to him? The guy washes in the bathhouse of the flying serpent and thinks about what kind of room they have built for themselves. According to Chris, there is no better place to be found. The guy thinks that the boy doesn't know anything about his family. His answer was only, his head is pounding, but there are no signs of injuries on him. The main character thinks that in a past life he died saving a person, but here one might say he survived by saving others. Events from a past life emerge in his memory as if it happened yesterday. A life in which there was no family, no relatives, no loved one. Such a life. But he could survive. But how can he live now? The boy thinks that many difficulties await him ahead, but he must become strong because he wants to know what awaits him next. The servant notes that the little hero looks very fresh in a new suit, and a fresh mug of drink is waiting for him in the tea house. The guy thinks that by taking this little homeless street boy without a good background, he will only waste his time. The boy is offered sweets while he waits, and he thinks that there must definitely be some reason for him to be so protected. He doesn't remember that in the novel Chris used that magic on someone. Maybe it takes a lot of internal energy, and this weakens the defense against the disease. The guy remembers that he knows the contents from cover to cover. Is it really impossible to somehow save Chris DeFern? A girl comes to the main character and thanks him very much for saving her sister, saying that she heard that if it weren't for him, she wouldn't be here anymore. The girl wants to thank him, but he says that this is not necessary because he has already been thanked. But she says that her family will not remain in debt. He says that anyone in his place would have done the same, but now it's more important for her to check on her sister. The main character, while the girl is leaving, remembers that she is the only daughter in her family. But unfortunately, she disappointed the family by being poor with a sword, and that girl with a sword is her relative in the lateral line. Even if her younger sister is always held up as an example to her, she still loves her immensely. The child remembers that the girl was supposed to die there, thereby infuriating the second one, especially when she finds out that this is the work of her family. But he seems to be the one who can help avoid this in the future. He also understands that now, along the timeline, somewhere is the beginning of the prologue of the first volume. Here Chris must save Jack Reed. Right now, one of the most terrible incidents is about to happen. He understands that he needs to prevent the conspiracy, otherwise he himself cannot survive. The man says that since the boy is already better, they can talk in more detail about his past, but only after hearing this does he burst into an uncontrollable coughing fit. The main character says that his throat is sore from drinking tea, but those around him say that this cannot be true. Chris says that the magical energy is scattered inside, but it will soon pass. It's just a trifle. DeFern reports that someone simply added poison to the boy. The second person does not know who could have done this. The doctor says that the motive itself is more interesting. He says that the poison was in the sweets, which were given not only to him, but also to the strong warriors who eat here. He orders to get rid of this. And you also need to arm yourself. No one knows when the attack will come. The boy is glad that he decided to try everything on purpose so that the presence of poison would be detected. Chris understands that Nick did this on purpose, and therefore says that if something comes to light, he will be the savior of the flying kite. DeFern says with a satisfied smile that when it's all over, the boy will get a job, and he himself thinks that he is sorry that he was dragged into this. The main character realizes that this is a great way to earn some money and decides that martial arts can wait. The boy says that he does not remember his home and family, but is happy to be useful. The head of the escort says that they will definitely not be disappointed in this young hero. DeFern, with a strange smile, grabbing the head by the shoulder, says that it is impossible, but that it is impossible remains a mystery to the public. Night, some dark shadows are creeping into the Flying Serpent's residence. They clearly have bad intentions. But it turns out that the inhabitants were already waiting for the enemy. They come out ready for battle. The invaders do not understand what is happening and why no one is sleeping, and everyone was just waiting for them. The master puts a katana to the face of one of the enemies, asking who they are and how they even dared to use poison in the presence of the best healer. The enemy uses a dirty trick, but the head of the escort uses Hongwan's valiant sword technique to attack. Enemies clash with weapons, knocking sparks out of the metal, and a tense atmosphere of battle reigns around. The ninja lunges, filling himself with bloody energy as he attacks. He uses the Blood Demon sword as a trap, and Hongwan's valiant sword uses the World Order move. The man rushes to attack. He understands that for him it doesn't matter where these warriors come from. The most important thing for him is to protect everyone. He makes an overhead strike, but the enemy wants to thrust. This could be the hero's last attack, but the stream deflects the enemy's blow, allowing him to only slightly scratch his face. The master uses the recumbent dragon ascension technique, cutting his opponent in half. Nick looks out from behind the doors. He realizes that it has already begun. It doesn't look like war at all. He sees that one has not yet regained consciousness, but thinks that it would be better for him not to wake up, given what awaits him after. The boy understands that if not for his intervention, a big disaster would have happened for the Flying Serpent. Perhaps this would have dealt the final blow to him. The rest of the escorts would have risen and began to fight for power. The sleeping man lets out some kind of animalistic cry. Nick understands that the point is not to wake him up. It doesn't work. It's probably because of the smell of blood outside. The main character finds candles with the smell of some herbs. They cover the smell of blood outside, and the patient calms down. Our hero says that even though this guy on the bed is the main character of the book, he will have to be more careful with someone like Nick. The boy no longer hears screams outside, and the smell of blood seems to have disappeared, so the battle is really over. He decides not to take part in the treatment of the wounded. Otherwise, those who are on the verge of death may survive. He already inclined his luck towards the almost complete victory of the Flying Serpent. He remembers his past life and thinks why he saved those people. Nick understands that the main character of the book has stopped breathing. He urgently needs to do something. The boy tries to perform mouth-to-mouth artificial respiration, but the moment his lips touch, the guy wakes up. He grabs the boy by the neck and asks who sent him, but changes his mind and says that he will ask his corpse. Only at this moment does the main character remember that in the book, this guy became stronger from killing because of the demonic entity inside him. But then he realizes that now he needs to think about how to get out. The boy drops the candle, but the main character of the book only relaxes, beginning to remember where he is. In even greater rage, he goes down to the floor, about to attack the main character, who thinks about how to calm him down. Nick says some phrase from the past of the book hero. He freezes over him and plunges into bitter memories of the past. He remembers the death of his mother in his own hands. The hero says that the guy should not give in to the bloody parasite inside him, because then he will become a puppet. He says that he needs to take the medicine within 10 days. He asks how the boy knows everything, but he says that it doesn't matter now. Jack asks if Nick is also being hunted by blood cult members. The boy realizes that he can pretend to be one of the children of an ancient family, who are considered good spies, and therefore begins to hint at this. Nick says that Jack has only two choices, die here or trust Nick, and he says that he can just knock him out and run away. Reed remembers that it was this guy who saved him then. It seems he had other plans. Nick says that there is already a lot of smoke. Isn't it time to make a decision? Jack agrees to his plan. Then Nick begins to scream like a small child, opens the door and runs out onto the handles, screaming in feigned fear, and shocking the hero of the book, people begin to lead him out of the burning building. People gather the seriously wounded to take them to a suitable place for treatment. Doctors see a little boy operating on wounded people. Everyone around is in shock, and he is wondering how to help them in such conditions. Chris, the servant and the head of the escort, say that 36 people were lightly wounded, 12 were seriously injured, 6 of the seriously injured were killed. Nick operates on a man with a punctured lung using a throwing knife. Doctors immobilize the wounded man, and DeFern watches. Chris's servant draws blood from the lung, just as Nick asked for the man to survive. The doctor is very pleased with how his student stitches up a seriously wounded warrior at that age. Chris talks about his incredible medical skills to the head of the escort. They already thought they were just dreaming. People who have just seen the boy at work notice that he is already sleeping. Although he was just on his feet, the doctor orders the servant to take the boy to bed. After that day, rumors began to circulate everywhere about what abilities the little boy had. The warriors talk about how it is almost impossible to split the attackers. They remain silent even after torture. And if you turn away, they try to commit suicide. The hero thinks that being small is convenient. He can easily hide or crawl through somewhere. He heard that Lilia Conson had recently arrived. She must be very annoyed that her younger sister was still alive, but came so as not to arouse suspicion. The guy understands that they don't know anything, but are chatting, because Lilia loves her sister very much. It frightens him that they have such an opinion about her. Then he hears that they are talking about him, that they found a mark on his neck, but this was explained by the fact that a neighboring child had a nightmare. They wonder if the little hero is unintentionally covering for the second boy so that he will not be punished. Nick is glad that everyone is on his side. He hears that the head of the escort and the main doctor have almost gone to the races to find a cure for the neck. He thinks that people seem to think that Lilia wants to kill her sister. They don't know her at all, because she wanted to give her sister Maria the place of head of the family, and she's probably already looking for those robbers. Jack appears and discovers the lost boy, displeasedly noting that he has been looking for him for some time. The main character of the book is interested in what the boy needs from him. He says nothing. Greatly surprising read. He says that he saved people who were on the verge of life and death, discovered poison so that the escort could prepare for an attack in advance, and looked after him during the battle. Jack grabs the little hero. He says that he doesn't understand why he has such a reward. The main character of the book asks if he wants a deal. Nick says he changed his mind because he can't trust Jack. He remains silent. Peterson asks why he's still here. Is he expecting an apology or something? He later says that he agrees to the deal and that he can now call him Big Brother. Jack, confused, asks if he is offering to fraternize with him. The boy is nervously silent. The main character of the book says that it's somehow strange to call him an older brother for saving his life. The hero asks that everything is correct. He shouldn't be the youngest, since he is older. The main character of the book insists on a duel. Nick shouts, "Is he really going to fight with a civilian? He doesn't even know martial arts. Why he is so bad? He intimidates the weak, who, moreover, is his savior." Peterson repeats his demands. The book's protagonist becomes indignant again, and Nick says he won't become a little brother just because he was hit. He makes an incredibly smug face and once again asks to call him Big Brother. Jack does what he was asked, but the boy is not happy with this. He shouts at him to say it louder. Reed shouts throughout the valley, his older brother says. Then it would be like that right away. Lilia greets the boy, calling him a baby savior and wondering what they are doing there. The boy is very dissatisfied with his just-received nickname. The girl says that she is collecting flowers for her sister. She wonders if the boy knows what herbs are suitable for recovery. He is a healer, but he says that he has not studied them much. As a result, they went together to collect grass and chatted with both sisters. Maria is one of those people with whom the more you communicate, the more energized you become. The girl hands the sword to the guy. He realizes that it is the Heek-Song Windblade, one of the famous indestructible blades. Its dark blade doesn't reflect light, making it perfect for stealth missions, but the boy says he can't accept it. She says that this is her gratitude for saving her, but the young hero says that the family has already thanked him. She says that it was them, not herself. Maria says that he still does not match her abilities as a swordsman. She wanted to return him to the family, but she would be more happy if he used it. He agrees, but asks her to show her how to use it, because he doesn't know how at all. The sister is standing with a sword in the arena. The weather is clear, the sun is shining brightly. She shows off her new sword, swinging it like a flash, as her sister and Nick watch. In the Conson family, the speed of movement is the most important thing. Thanks to this principle, the master of the family, Conson Mark has become omnipotent. Families, with a refined speed of sword control, usually take the elements of water or wind as a basis. The movements of her sword are mesmerizing. She clearly does not feel tired. Such is the appearance of a young but gifted genius. The swordsmen of the Conson family inflict maximum damage on the enemy while expending a minimum of effort. Nick notices that now the girl is in complete self-forgetfulness. The principle of the Conson clan's sword techniques, the extreme, is also the limit of counterattack. The smoothness of her movements is like a pine tree swaying in the wind. The sword cuts through the air with a clear movement, and the speed rushes to the maximum. This is the moment of comprehension. It's impossible to take your eyes off it. It looks completely different in person than when reading the book. The second sister says that this is a great happiness for the family. She congratulates her sister on reaching the peak of her skill. The servants also congratulate the lady, saying that this significant event should be reported to other family members as soon as possible. They once again congratulate her on becoming a true swordmaster. The girl says that all this is thanks to Peterson. His advice alone really helped her reach this level. Everyone looks at the little boy. He says that this is not so at all, and in general he is in great debt to them for the wind blade. One of the sisters says that such a gift compared to his help in mastering the Kansen sword technique is just a trifle. The second sister falls. The other is completely shocked by what happened. She asks to be picked up, but decides to do it herself. Nick realizes that it was not an ordinary sword, but a sword of self-forgetfulness. It seems that she had to spend all her strength to comprehend this technique. Although her endurance is much greater than that of an ordinary warrior, everyone has a limit. Nick looks sadly into the distance as Lilia carries Maria away from him, followed by the servants. He decides that while the Kansen family is busy restoring their strength, he needs to look for Jack. There is a big market. People walk everywhere who want to buy something, or maybe they just came to look at the goods. But one thing is for sure, there are a lot of them here. The boys go and buy food, Nick mocks, saying that Jack must eat everything, since his older brother bought him so much. The main character of the book is furious again, but Peterson says that they agreed, and what he just did was the act of an older brother. Nick notices the sugar-covered fruit on a stick and decides to buy it no matter what. When the boy returns, his younger brother is already being attacked by a man. Nick understands that he can't leave for a second, but they're already in conflict. The man attacks, but the child quickly counterattacks, delivering a strong blow to the head. Another person shouts that the boy is impudent and tries to strike again, but he hits his opponent so hard that he simply flies away. And then the boy with a blazing red gaze goes to finish off the previous opponent, who is now trying to get up from the floor. The boy stands between his defeated rivals. The body of one of them was even broken through the wall. People don't believe how it happened that a child destroyed 2 dogs. What kind of family is he from? They are always rowdy here. Now it will become calmer. Nick thinks that it's all his brother, but he thinks that because of this gang of bandits, there will be no problems, so he simply offers to take a stick of fruit. The young hero realizes that the main character of the book has again lost his mind from the blood in the air. Jack madly rushes at the bodies of defeated opponents, tearing them to shreds, thereby creating a real meat grinder. Nick doesn't understand what his little brother is doing and runs to him to stop him. Reed continues to abuse the bodies, turning them into a bloody mess that cannot be called human. Pederon remembers his true nature. He shouts out what is wrong with him, and he himself remembers that this is the effect of the blood of the deadly star of the sky, just like in the book. The boy calms down. The older brother gives him a stick with fruit, but he says that he is not finished yet, because that guy used martial arts against the weak. He thinks about how to calm his brother down and shouts that all the icing has almost melted. Jack rushes for a treat. Nick sees this human instinct to get out of the influence of the deadly star of the sky. He understands that another urge needs to be provoked. People stand and stare blankly, and Peterson thinks that he is lucky because he is a little boy who is easily fooled by sweets. Nick asks his brother to stand still because he cannot return to the flying serpent with a bloody face. If he wants to get along in society, then he needs it. But he just looks questioningly. The boy ironically thinks that he is a heavenly demon. Why should he worry about social life and understand something there, if he can just beat up the one who wants him? I'm tired of it. Someone shouts inquiringly whether Mr. Savior is here. Both boys are very surprised. Nick notices that these are people from the Flying Kite. One is called Adam Clark. The second is Robert Stark. They say that when they heard about what happened at the market, they immediately rushed over. They are wondering if both boys are okay. They say that everything is fine, they just decided to have fun, and then Nick asks what kind of child is with them. Whose is he? Robert says that this is his son, who managed to be born and grow up while he was away. The father turns to his son, calling him Nick, and showing him the savior of his father, because just recently he needed urgent help. Then only this kid could help him. Nick asks if his son's name is really Nick. The man says that he named him in his honor. The boy stretches out his hands to his father's savior, and he carefully takes him in his arms. Nick understands that the child is completely healthy, and his father looks very happy and quickly gets used to the joy of fatherhood. Robert says that thanks to him, that trip ended well for him, now that he is resigning. Nick wonders if it was because of the lameness. He says that his older brother has long wanted to make him the head of the escort, but he has something to regret, so that trip was his last. The man is grateful to Peterson for saving his life. Now he must dedicate it to others, and he is also grateful that he can be with his wife and child. The kid grabs Jack's finger, but he doesn't turn away or pull his hand away. Everyone around is surprised. Reed says that Nick deserves to be called an older brother, because warriors do nothing but kill. He always thought that it was enough to just deal with bad people. The sword of life is just a beautiful phrase to cover up the murder, but Nick saved that uncle and him, saved the lives of the warrior of the Conson family and other people of the Flying Serpent. Jack says that most likely he will continue to kill. He can't do anything else, and someone else's death makes him feel alive. So Nick is better than him and more worthy of being called an older brother. He says that he is glad to hear this and asks to repeat it again, and then becomes very pleased when the younger brother calmly does it. Nick thinks that the guy is belittling himself by calling himself a murderer. He has not been able to experience the delights of simple happiness, although this has been the case in martial arts novels lately. But at the same time, Peterson believes that he has a very cool life. The boy wonders if his younger brother will go to Cedarwood. He says that he will go when the next transport appears. Nick says that the road will not be easy. Will he change his mind? Jack says that he has nowhere else to go. But why isn't Nick interested? Why doesn't he ask why he needs to go there? Does he really already know something? The young hero, wriggling out of an awkward situation, says that the final decision is his, and he definitely has some reason for this. Jack wonders when Nick will tell him what he is hiding, but he only thinks that he can always tell him. But he will consider him crazy. He says that someday he will definitely tell you, but for now he is eating how to get rid of the red parasite that worries him so much. It is important to do this before they go their separate ways. Nick waves goodbye to the main character of the book. He thinks that he told him everything he could, and then everything is in the hands of Jack himself. Now Peterson is thinking about what he should do. All this time there has been a struggle for life, and now it feels as if he has lost its meaning. Chris appears. He says that he has finally found him. The boy is very surprised to see him. He has a small conversation with him. The boy wonders if he really wants to make him his student. DeFern says that he thought it was obvious. Nick is worried and thinks that no students of this famous doctor were mentioned in the novel. Chris asks doomedly if the boy really doesn't want to study with him, but he says that it's a great honor, just very unexpected. DeFern sighs with relief, and Nick wonders what they will teach him. He says what he knows himself. The boy notices that the doctor answers without doubt. It seems that he is not joking at all. The doctor notices that the boy still doubts something, and the boy thinks that Chris is seriously ill, so he seems to be lucky. But at the same time, if he is taken as a student, he will die faster. He thinks that DeFern has no children, which means that all his property will most likely go to him. The disease is unusual, but an ingrained phenomenon in martial arts novels. Nick wonders if there really is no way to cure him, but he says that he will become a student only on the condition that Chris takes care of his health. DeFern does not understand what the boy is talking about, but he says that he is talking about the peculiarities of his body, but he thinks that there is a way to heal it. Nick feels that Servant Bob is angry for some reason. The doctor is confused, but this character was mentioned only a couple of times in the entire first volume. Chris asks Bob to stop exuding such an aura, and he shouts that the boy is communicating with the master inappropriately. Nick thinks he understands how difficult it is for a patient with terminal cancer to hear that there may be a cure and a chance to cure the disease. Hope is more cruel than despair. It makes a person cry and feel helpless, and as a result, he dies in suffering. But at the same time, what's wrong with this? Isn't it a doctor's duty to tell the truth? Life is a chance. You can't give up. Chris says that he is not going to accept treatment or give up, and he will not die a peaceful death either. Nick shouts in rage that there is still a way to save him. Bob says if he likes repeating this nonsense, and Chris says enough for both of them. DeFern thinks that Peterson has always behaved peacefully and politely, seemed extraordinary and received the love of others, but now he is a completely different person. Chris says that he will listen to him, however. If in the end it turns out that he is simply mocking him, he will take back his offer to become an apprentice, and they will not see each other again. Peterson thinks he's used to the mistrust and says he understood everything he said. Bob asks what the gentleman plans to do. He says that he will believe him, but if nothing works out, death from illness will not be beautiful. He will not be able to die peacefully. He will fight the disease with all his might until the very end. Nick says that they are creatures, that in the end they are doomed to lose, of course. Someday this moment will definitely come, but isn't it worth at least trying to win? Therefore, he will not allow Chris to give up while there is still a chance to fix everything. He says that he has only one question. Is DeFern ready to fight to the very end? Chris begins to think that this question has haunted him for a long time, but he couldn't answer it. No matter how perfectly he treated, the warriors continued to hurt themselves out of the valor of love or malice. It seemed to him that they were not like moths that were directly flying towards their death. If he healed them this time, what would happen next? What in this meaning? He says that his long-standing demon of the heart easily broke out. Then it became somehow light and empty. Bob asks, since when the gentleman was so fascinated by him, he says that he admits that he felt sympathy for him at first sight. Now he likes him even more. He will make him his student. He says that maybe he can learn something from him later. Maybe they can switch roles later. The servant asks if Chris really believes that he can be cured. He says that there are no guarantees, but he is convinced that there is always a chance. Isn't it surprising that all this time he never once thought that treatment exists? It will take a really long time and will be painful. But this is good. He can live longer. Bob says that he doesn't like this kid, claims that he won't let the owner just die. Has he ever met such tactless people? The servant whines that if he spoke like that to someone from a noble family, his head would already fly off his shoulders. Chris says that willpower is an important quality for someone who will become his student. DeFern says that if he weren't who he is, maybe he wouldn't have shown interest in him. Bob says that the master hasn't convinced him. Chris is with Nick on the shore. DeFern asks if the boy said that he would not let him die in peace. He firmly answers that yes. The doctor says that his student has to promise him something. Being his student is not easy. Nick says that he knows that he will have to understand a lot, but Chris says that it will not be easy for him to learn. DeFern prepares his hand, releases a ton of magical energy, he fires a finger shot. Nick understands that this is not easy to do. It is not as powerful as a spear or a knife, but it is still incredible. Chris says that Nick will have to become strong for his sake, and also precise in order to apply such skills in medicine. DeFern demonstrated a more powerful version of the previous magic. Peterson understands that he concentrated the energy in only one finger. This is not all his power. He says that they will not have the same occupations as in military families. He will inherit his strength and knowledge. Chris asks not to let him go to the next world so easily. Nick shouts that he gives his word that he will not do everything in his power. DeFern asks him to bow 9 times as a rite of passage. Nick tells the Conson sisters that the teacher left the escort for a while to run errands. He said that as soon as he finished, they would leave immediately. One of the girls is very sad because it was he who became DeFern's first student. The boy is very glad that the girl is already feeling better and she can already walk. The sisters laugh embarrassedly that this is thanks to his care, even though she wants to rest for some more time. She asks what is behind his back. He laughs slightly and says that these are gifts from the head, who is very touched by his departure. It's a pity that all the warriors are looking for Chris. He doesn't have much time left to live, and he decided to pass on all his valuable knowledge to Nick. But in theory, this boy could become the next doctor of this level. You need to treat him well while he is small, because then, when everyone turns to him for help, it may already be too late. Lilia says that she has prepared something for him. He says that she can contact him on a personal basis. She asks if this is true. He looks at the chest and realizes that it looks expensive. There must be something valuable there. They say that there is just another pill. He understands that it is like the old one, only it is made from a 1,000-year-old pine tree. There are only a few of these left. They tell him to eat it, but before that he must show it to his teacher. He is very glad that he received such a gift. The girls look in embarrassment at the very pleased guy. Couldn't he refuse at least once? Many people say goodbye to Nick, among them his sisters. Everyone wishes him a good journey. He thanks the sisters again for the gift. They tell him to be sure to let the teacher know before he eats it, and they also remind him not to forget to use the sword. The girl hugs the boy tightly. She once again sincerely thanks him for saving her life then. The head of the escort thanks Chris DeFern, but he says that it's nothing. It's just fate that brought them together. Adam thinks that the phoenix must grow under the wing of the phoenix in order to grow into an excellent bird. He cannot wait for it to fly into the air. A few months later, Chris's palace. He carries 2 heavy buckets on his shoulders. Chris says that it is too early for him to study martial arts. For this, he still needs to strengthen the external and internal energies, and by repeating the movements, he will increase them. DeFern says that to learn martial arts, he must stand firmly on his feet, be one with the earth. He says that internal strength has always been the strength of his family, but they have always been weak in physical and external strength. They believed that external energy is not important compared to internal energy. But he says that he will teach him differently. Nick will become like a strong and large vessel that cannot be broken, and having learned the internal energy, he will be filled. The boy falls on the tile and wonders if the teacher is serious about all this. DeFern says that from tomorrow, Peterson will carry not 2, but 4 buckets of water, the guy screams, not believing what is happening. Nick thinks that his teacher is a pretender, looks at him with an angelic smile, and at least a drop of mercy, whether now or when they first arrived here. A few months earlier, Chris shows Nick his estate and office. Everything around is shining with decoration. The teacher says that people called this place the Medicine Palace because of its size. Nick remembers that DeFern was being treated somewhere in the mountains. He realizes that this seems to be the same place. He says that it's so big because there are a lot of patients coming through, because even though Chris didn't take on anyone as an apprentice, it's still a very famous infirmary. Bob asks if they have already dealt with carrier pigeons, and Nick remembers that they were mentioned very often in the novel. These are specially trained birds that send letters. The girl says that all the letters have been dealt with. 2 letters arrived simultaneously from different cities. It seems that both heirs suffered as a result of martial arts training. The servant says that these cities are not friends with each other, so they will have to decide which of them to go to treat, because both want it. Chris looks at the letter and realizes that Prince Suramoon is not seriously injured, but Princess Cord has more important problems. DeFern says that the prince needs to send a letter about bed rest and write out prescriptions for puncture wounds and internal wounds. The composition of the drugs is simple. They can find everything they need in local pharmacies. He says that the Kordov family should be the first to write, because despite the wounds, they still won, so their offense will be more serious. Bob says that he will do everything as they said, and Nick is very surprised at how much Chris knows and reacts very quickly. Peterson watches with fascination as the pigeons are sent. He watches with fascination this miracle. It is not for nothing that the palace is one of the medical palaces of 3 generations in the Middle Kingdom. DeFern says that people live, which means they continue to get sick and hurt themselves. For warriors who fight every day, this happens much more often. They are always looking for the infirmary, which is why it is so important to have a message between them. Chris brings the boy to his office. He notices that although he is handsome, he is slightly ascetic. He asks him to settle down. A very strange place for such a doctor. DeFern says that while they can pass on recommendations, skills cannot be transferred like that, which is why there is an organization of healers. Chris begins to talk about the palace. Several clans are subordinate to him. They are also doctors' offices. All the offices in the province exchange information through the palace. Nick understands that he knows this very well, but they continue to tell him he is very uncomfortable because of this. If there is a war among the alliances, then the doctor's palace gathers all the doctors. Peterson thinks about something completely different, not listening to what his teacher says. There are also medical departments in which medical research is carried out, and there are also regional hospitals and doctors who continue the family business. Nick continues to think about improving the office, because the window is open to allow carbon monoxide to escape. He needs to come up with an alternative for the winter so as not to freeze. The main character continues to think about heated floors, that it will not be possible to use them soon, and in general that he first needs to install a stove. At this moment, the teacher notices that his student is flying in the clouds. Chris says that the scoundrel is not listening to him at all. Nick understands how disrespectful this is. He apologizes for being thoughtful. The teacher says that there is nothing wrong with this. He wonders what the boy was thinking about, and he thinks about whether to speak. Then he realizes that this is stupid, because the teacher is his patient. In the end, he says that he was thinking about creating a good environment, which will help in treating his intermittent pulse. Chris doesn't understand. Nick asks if the teacher is cold. He agrees, and the boy says that it's because of illness. But in fact, the heat from the body simply leaves, and then the body cools down. And if you replenish the missing heat, you can soften complications. DeFern asks what the guy's plan is. He has a rather unusual point of view. He says that in this room, the teacher's symptoms are only getting worse. Chris asks what kind of room he needs. The main character remembers that in the modern world, all doctors pay a lot of attention to hygiene, because everyone there knows that a common cause of illness is recurrent illness. But here, it seems, this is still unknown. The boy says that now we need to forget about medicine and think about architecture. Now this is a designer's room, not a doctor's, but it is important not to forget and maintain balance. Peterson says that first of all, there is not enough heat here. We need to install a stove. Chris thinks about it. The hero says that it could be dangerous because for some reason the symptoms are similar to drowning. Nick says that carbon monoxide is to blame. The doctor does not understand what he is talking about. The boy says that people need oxygen to breathe, but the air also contains other gases. And as the temperature rises, the activity of carbon increases, and with a lack of oxygen, carbon monoxide is formed. Chris says he understands it's like dying because of water, but because of the presence of impurities in the air. Nick thinks that his teacher is a genius because he learned information so quickly without having the slightest base, and he, in turn, wonders how the boy knows this. Chris says that his family has been collecting various knowledge for a long time, but this is the first time he has heard about what Peterson said. He says that this is a secret. DeFern wonders if it's even true for him, because he is his teacher. The boy says that if he tells, they won't believe him and will consider him dangerous. Nick understands that he can't lie, This is Chris, his teacher, and a good person, also a genius. Although remembering how he took revenge in the book, there is no doubt about his determination. DeFern closes his eyes and says that the student does not have to answer because he will accept him as he is, and also thanks him for the advice about the room. Nick understands that coal can be used to make something like a pencil, it's even convenient, and he draws something on a piece of paper. Chris says that Bob holds the position of an official in the medicine palace, so Nick can turn to him with questions. Peterson thinks that this way he will be able to fully demonstrate his skills. Nick thinks about how he never thought he'd ever need those documentaries he watched about heated floors. Bob thinks if they can make it happen, and asks out loud about the images. The boy says that the first one has heated floors, and the second one has a stove. He says that it is closed, so smoke will not come into the room, and also thinks that in the lower grades they heated food for such food. I wonder if there are heaters here in elementary schools. Bob reasons that at first the boy's words seemed nonsense, but then he saw the logic. He asks about the glass window. Nick says that when it gets colder, it will be difficult for the teacher to go outside. In addition, he adds that good lighting is necessary for physical and psychological health. The official says that qualified workers will be needed. The costs are considerable, but they will cope. He says that it will take a day to install a stove and windows, but it is better to discuss the creation of a heated floor with a specialist. It will also take time to rebuild a new house for the owner. He thinks that all the work will take no more than 10 days. Nick thinks that this time is enough for the teacher's well-being to improve. There is a chance that heated floors and sunbathing will help extend his life by at least 10 years. Also, do not forget that he has well-developed internal energy, and he knows how to make miraculous elixirs. The boy looks at the new buildings and does not understand how these people managed it so quickly without modern equipment. Bob reports that they have already finished installing the stove. The owner is now in his room. Nick enters the room. It is very hot there. He understands that in winter it will be warm here, and also the new window lets in light well. He didn't even imagine that it would be so good with a window and a stove. He tells the teacher not to forget to ventilate the room. The teacher says that just yesterday he was tormented by a cough all day, but today he is much better. He praises the boy and says that the stove was a great idea, an amazing idea. Chris lightly pats the child on the head and says that he is still a smart and sweet kid. No one before him would have thought that windows could be glazed. Nick thinks how the minor character Bob got so much strength to make a window in one day, and even managed to install a stove. Is he a wizard or something? The boy thinks that he will soon find out everything about him, because he is devoted to the teacher like no other, but something seems suspicious. Here Chris says with a laugh how one head of the family is proud of his heirs, but they cannot keep up with his talent. Nick is very happy that his teacher has improved so much that he even started joking. Bob spies on the heroes and thinks that the owner was fascinated by the boy from the very first meeting, and now he is completely behaving like a fool. He thinks that before Chris smiled only when the work situation required it, every day he was getting worse. There was complete silence in the doctor's palace. But with the appearance of the boy, the smile does not leave his face. Nick had enough skills to find a solution to the problem associated with loss of heat due to illness. He is clearly not an ordinary child. Bob thinks that if the child really wants to save his owner's life, then he will do everything possible to help him, even if it costs him his life. Nick leaves, and the servant approaches Chris and asks how his channels through which energy flows in the body are. DeFern says that he thought it was enough to simply prepare a certain healing elixir, and did not even realize that it was worth starting from home, his omission. Bob says that this is not the responsibility of the doctor. The drawings that the boy drew were very detailed. They say that they have Western influence, although this is an illusion, because local technologies are more advanced. Chris says that he is his student, after all. Bob confirms that he is indeed a student worthy of being talked about. The official says, "Does the owner really think that he doesn't know how he praised him in letters that will fly to the recipients next week? The whole province will be on their ears. Everyone will be interested in who this Nick Peterson is. He believes that Chris is his, after all overestimates." DeFern says that it's time for him to go to bed, so Bob can go. He says that he's already leaving. Is he really jealous of the boy? He shouts that he didn't say that. Thank God today he didn't have any pain. He's breathing calmly, and he's sleeping soundly for the first time in a long time. Bob tells everyone to be quieter today, because the gentleman finally managed to fall asleep. Chris says that their ancestor, Teacher Gong Maeon, he issued many military laws and founded various disciplines, and now they, his descendants, continue to develop his legacy. He says he originally planned to adopt Nick to continue their family line, but changing his last name is not so easy. DeFern sadly says that for now he will only be his student, but he is such a fool that he didn't think about Bob before. He would have done this here if he had come here as his son. Chris says that later Nick will still be able to use the surname Chagall. The boy hopes that later means when he grows up, and before Defern dies. It's hard for Nick to realize this. The weight of the words weighs heavily on him. Chris and Peterson come to the clearing. There are some dolls there. The boy asks what they are. Defern, with a malicious grin, says that these are wooden dolls for their training. The teacher says that in the family they take as a basis a special strength. It improves memory and has a positive effect on thinking. A developed brain liberates human feelings. Chris names the points on the mannequin's body and accurately shoots them with his finger, hitting the target directly. Nick notices that this is a familiar movement. However, this time the blow did not go through, but only touched the doll. How is it possible? You can create a pistol with enormous power, but you cannot control it. Chris says that someone else would have asked why he didn't punch through the doll like before, and also why the blow was so weak. Nick says that the teacher has impeccable control. They didn't even damage the paint on the doll. Chris says that this was correctly noted. Chris explains to the boy that their family, using the power of the brain in this way, achieved great achievements in comparison with ordinary warriors. Because of this, arrogance became the root of all troubles. The teacher warns Nick that he will teach him differently. The knowledge that Peterson will receive will be much more complete than what Defern's ancestors received. Nick asks whether finger flash is the main martial art of the Chagall clan, and Chris replies with a smile that it is more like child's play. The healer says that their combat power is represented in the techniques of wielding a sword, as well as in the art of wielding a fan. Naturally, this is not all. Their clan is also fluent in more than 10,000 types of weapons and techniques. Chris notes that this is a rather frightening feature of their clan. Nick admires the teacher's words. He is shocked that these people can use weapons that they see for the first time. He wonders if he can do the same, but then he looks at his teacher and realizes that there is no room for any doubts. Peterson asks if he too can become so omnipotent, he confirms, saying that he will become so as soon as he learns all the fighting techniques of his family. The boy thinks that if he becomes omnipotent, then a heavenly demon will come for him to kill him, because if someone wants to become a leader, then he must prove that his skills are the most outstanding. And Jack, even now, provokes fights and threatens to kill everyone. Reed was pursuing the Almighty as it was in the novel. If Nick wants to become him, then his brother will come for his head. The boy asks the teacher why he becomes omnipotent, confusing him. Chris thinks and says that he doesn't know, and he himself thinks that the boy thinks why so many people in the province train until they lose pulse. Then he says that they obviously won't give him any medal or certificate for this, but they will honor him and consider him an idol. He says that becoming omnipotent grants rights that are not available to others. The boy says that he sees no point in becoming omnipotent. Chris asks what the student wants to become then. Nick says that he wants to become an all-powerful healer, like his teacher. Defern pats the boy on the head and says what a sweetheart he is. Are there still such cute children in the world? Nick laughs. The doctor says that he knows that many of the Chagall clans sought to become omnipotent, but for the first time, someone wanted to become an omnipotent doctor. Chris thinks that the boy was sent by the gods, and Nick thinks that he will devote himself to medicine in order to live long. Let Jack become the leader. In the novel, the main character did not kill the doctor. Nick argues that the meaning of his life is in this. Just the thought of this makes his heart beat faster. He decides that it will not be easy, but this is his path now. He believes that he must cure him in any case. He will not forgive himself for his death. He is the one who first gave him warmth. He was kind without any reason. Who would have thought that he would have to experience something like this? How can he be left? He is a debtor. Chris understands that this is what Nick Peterson is like. Someone who gives up omnipotence for the sake of medicine and saving other people's lives. Defern says the most important thing is to be able to feel the energy inside him. No matter what happens, he doesn't need to move. Chris touches Nick's shoulders, transferring his energy to him so he can feel it. He feels the energy of his teacher, and he says that he needs to focus on it. This is called the Great Celestial Cycle. Peterson understands that this is internal energy. She feels cold and heavy, maybe because of the influence of that illness on the teacher. Chris says that Nick should feel a hardening in the abdominal area. The teacher says that the ritual was successful. Now the absorbed energy belongs to him. He can control it. When the hardening becomes viscous, the vital force becomes like resin. Now they are absorbing the energy of a 100-year-old pine. Next time they will try with a 1,000-year-old. You can't do everything at once. Nick understands that he thought so. Chris says that his student can open his eyes. The next step is to study the basis of the 5 elements that form the world: fire, water, wood, metal, earth. DeFern says that now the boy must breathe the way he taught him. Let him try to move the internal energy on his own. Chris says that water helps trees bloom, wood gives power to fire, fire makes earth, earth is metal, and metal purifies water. Peterson feels the energy moving inside him, just like the teacher said. It's even fun in a way. DeFern says that the basis of the principle, the cycle of the 5 elements, the reason why this principle is combined with medicine is that internal energy does not collide, does not mix, and the movement is harmonious. No other energy is able to heal internal wounds and stimulate vitality. Chris explains that when energy starts moving in the opposite direction, it is called a lethal combination. When water meets fire, the fire goes out. When fire meets metal, the metal melts. The metal cuts the earth and the wood becomes part of the earth. Nick is surprised and asks if this is bad. Chris says that there are cases where this is even necessary. For example, if one goes into a magical frenzy, then a lethal combination is used to stop it. Nick thinks that the cycle of the 5 elements and the deadly combination are like medicine and poison. In modern medicine, they call it a side effect. In clinical trials as a drug for cardiovascular diseases, it was found to be able to treat obesity and diabetes. Poison, unsuitable for consumption, turned out to be a medicine for some patients. There are no bad or good medicines. The important thing is how to use them. Nick exhales a small beam of magical energy, realizing that the power in him begins to move faster. Knowledge occurs gradually. Everything has its time. Chris thinks that Peterson is a gifted child, and the saying about how a bard, when he learns a new chord, writes 9 new songs, is definitely about him, because after all, he is his student. DeFern thinks that it's probably worth telling other doctors that a new talent has appeared in America. This is very important. Bob hands over some small pills and says that Nick will need to take them. He says there are 5 types of essences: fire, water, wood, earth, and metal. Nick asks if he needs to take it all at once. The official says only one. The boy thinks that this is a test. He must choose the right pill, so he should choose the one whose properties are similar to wood, because he has already taken it. That's what the principal says. But in reality, he needs to take another one. According to the cycle, you need to choose fire, because this is how power works. Nick says that he chooses the fire pill. Peterson begins to smell the pill when she is left alone. He realizes that this means that they all worked differently together. To create a base using components in their pure form, you need to create a cycle that forms a circulation. Nick says he needs all the pills and Bob smiles, saying he knew he wouldn't be so easy to fool. The boy giggles that even someone like him finally figured out what was what. Peterson notices that the cycle begins with a tree and ends with it. Bob thinks that the boy is much smarter than he seemed. Chris's servant notes that if Nick had chosen only the fire pill, then the owner would have already considered the answer correct, and asks how the boy came up with the cycle. The student takes the pill in his hands, looks at it, and replies that it's all about the smell. Bob is very surprised. Nick says that at first he found it strange that none of the pills had a scent, but after observing, he noticed that each of them had its own personal aroma. The smells of the pills are so in harmony with each other that when mixed, the smell is interrupted and disappears completely. Therefore, Nick remembered the principles of the foundations of the 5 elements, and the correct answer suggested itself to him. Bob, with a peaceful face, tells his interlocutor that he is very insightful and his efforts were not in vain. He leaves, promising that he will convey the answer to the owner, and warns Nick to take the pills slowly. Peterson immediately pops the first pill into his mouth, winces, and notices that it has a sharp aftertaste. A week later, Nick reflects that he is only eating and activating the cycle, imagining himself no longer a person, but a pill processing machine. Bob takes the boy to the house where medicine is made, and he is delighted with the size of the room. The servant says that this house is one of the medical palaces of 3 generations under heaven. Such buildings are very rare. They can be counted on the fingers of one hand. Bob says that their palace specializes in the production and sale of various pills. Nick remembers that this was mentioned in the novel, but he had no idea that everything worked like that here. Bob reveals that they make medicines for different classes, from the highest to the lowest, the former only producing 1 or 2 a year, and warns Nick that even with his work with the teacher, such a medicine will be difficult for him to cope with. He tells the boy not to forget to take lower-grade pills every 3 days, and then from one, he will receive the same amount of internal energy that 6 months of training would bring. Peterson recalls that in the novel, students received energy from teachers, and the descendants of noble families took miracle drugs. The boy did not think that he would have the same. Bob enthusiastically asks how Nick manages to do so much and whether he gets enough sleep after working out. The main character smiles but doesn't answer, and thinks to himself that this is all nothing compared to the internship in his previous life. He remembers his suffering, realizing how exhausted he was both physically and mentally, and decides that if slavery had not been abolished, now it would be called a specialization for medical graduates. Nick also understands how badly everyone treated him, and his companions at that time were sadness and anger. Then they disappeared, and Peterson realized what emotional exhaustion was. Nick is glad that everything is completely different here. All the doctors support and praise him. He feels their love and respect every day. His thoughts are interrupted by the appearance of DeFern, who extends his hand to the boy and asks how he likes the medicine manufacturing department. He thanks Bob for his help, and he shines his hand through the guy and notices that he has already reached the first level. Satisfied, Nick asks if he did it quickly. Chris answers positively, but asks the boy to rest and not overexert himself like that again. DeFern invites the boy to eat and is going to tell him about the place where he will live. The construction of the new house was completed, thanks to a large number of workers, and the work was completed quite quickly. Chris shows his student the large glazed windows, heated floors and stove, tells him that the interior of the house is finished in wood and the walls are covered with clay. He notes that a house with such thermal insulation is not typical. Peterson is delighted that his advice was taken. He says a house says a lot about the owner, and this one, which does not let in heat, is a testament to Chris's willpower. The teacher points the boy to a bed laid out on the floor and asks if it would be comfortable for him to sleep on such a bed. Nick answers positively because the floor is warm. Chris notices that the house is as hot as a bathhouse, and Bob informs him that he loaded the stove with wood to the maximum to ensure its maximum temperature. DeFern says that at first he thought one stove would be enough, but the whole system is simply incomparable. Bob asks the owner if he wonders how the boy knows so much. Chris replies that they have already decided not to ask him about anything. Someday he will reveal his secret himself. The next morning, Nick greets his teacher at class, telling him that he was early, to which DeFern notices that the student was early. Peterson asks how the teacher is feeling. He smiles and reports that thanks to the heated floor, his health is better every day. They begin their lesson. Chris asks the boy to concentrate all his strength in his fingertips and concentrate on breathing. The main character does this very well. He feels the divine help of the elements. Fire flows through his body. DeFern hands the student a leaf from a tree. He successfully sets it on fire, after which he relaxes and stops the flow of fire. Chris notices that everything worked out for the boy, but he sadly states that for now, he won't be able to set fire to anything more than a blade of grass. The teacher reassures Nick, saying that everyone started with this, and he learns much faster than others. Then he offers to give the boy a task, since his level has already grown. Peterson does not understand what is being said, and meanwhile the teacher opens a fan in front of him. Nick realizes that he has never seen DeFern work with such a weapon. Chris throws himself at the tree with a fan, saying that the essence of fire, destruction, neither wood, nor iron, nor air can withstand it. A second later, a huge tree is cut down with one blow. Nick does not understand how this is even possible. He notices that the cut area is only slightly burnt, but the tree itself is not on fire. He cannot believe his eyes. Chris asks the boy if he liked it, and is immediately going to demonstrate the next element, wind energy. With one swing, the healer lifts a huge tree into the air, uprooting even the stumps remaining after the first trick. Peterson is surprised that the force of the wind is so powerful, and his teacher, meanwhile, connects two parts of the tree in the air and says that the energy of this element lies in movement. Nick and Chris stand in front of the tree, which has been stuck back into the ground. The boy is in shock. The teacher says that the cover was damaged by fire, so the plant is dead. He suggests that Peterson use the energy of the water on this tree to save it from death. Chris says that if Nick can do it, then he will consider the first task completed, but he doesn't know how long it might take. Bob walks with his owner and asks if he is in a hurry, because it is very difficult to reach the third element in the first lesson. Chris agrees with the servant, but believes he has given enough theory to the boy for him to cope. Bob thinks that the mentor is too strict. He may cherish Nick, but you won't get leniency from him in teaching. He understands that the main thing in such a matter is success, and besides, this approach will make the boy stronger. Nick, meanwhile, is still standing by the tree. A downpour suddenly begins. Peterson, upset by his failures, believes that now even the weather is against him, and is glad that at least there is somewhere to hide. The boy does not understand how he, being on the first level, can heal a tree with water energy. He could barely collect a pea-sized amount of water, and that's not enough to heal the tree's bark. Nick knows his teacher knew that very well. The main character does not understand why Chris gave him such a task. He assumes that he wanted the boy to despair, although this is a very dubious method. He decides that in such a situation, the only way out is death. If the teacher asked him to cut the tree, he would still be able to do it, but he doesn't know what to do now. Nick notices that the roots are intact, which means the tree did not die. Peterson thinks and decides to try to start treatment from the lower part, so that later he can revive the upper part as well. Nick sits under the crown and notices how quiet it is around. He thinks that in this weather, the roots absorb a lot of water, thanks to which the tree blooms. The boy understands that the tree absorbs the fire, and he returns it to the earth. Then the earth is combined with metal, which is associated with water. Nick is glad that he came to a decision. He immediately understands that the teacher reasoned the same way as himself. Peterson tries to multiply the amount of energy by combining elements, comparing this with patients who also increase the load gradually. The boy is not sure that he will succeed, because it is very dangerous to use a technique that he has not learned, but he decides to continue because he sees no other way out. Blue energy begins to glow around him and the tree, and Nick himself thinks that if he dies because of the tree, he will be remembered as a rare loser. He starts with the energy of the earth and feels how its amount increases when combined with metal. He is very happy. Then the enthusiastic hero combines the metal with water and notices that the energy has increased more than 8 times. Nick notices how the bark on the tree begins to grow together, but realizes that this is not the end. He starts with the energy of wood, which he will carry through fire, earth, metal, and water. Then the energy will increase 32 times. Peterson thinks that this is a bad option, since in such a situation, quality is more important than quantity. But on reflection, he realizes that there is nothing else left and decides to try. In the morning, Chris asks Bob if the boy is sleeping. He answers positively and offers to wake him up. But the teacher says that this should not be done, because Nick worked hard last night and needs rest. Bob thinks that he shouldn't have given the child such a difficult task, because asking too much could have a bad effect on the student. Chris approaches the tree and sees Nick's work. He is very surprised. Upon closer inspection, he notices that a cut is visible, and the bark has grown unevenly. He is convinced that the boy himself did it without anyone's help. Bob, standing behind the doctor, asks in surprise about Nick's work. DeFern says that in just half a day, he is delighted with the boy's strength. Chris informs his subordinate that on the very first task, this boy mastered the third element. Completed the task, anyone in his place would not have mastered such a level of control, but this one could. DeFern states that it is now obvious that Peterson will become his heir. Such a talent cannot be underestimated. Everyone needs to be told. Bob does not agree with the owner. He believes that when the owners of medical offices find out about Nick, they will begin to make claims against their students. Chris does not pay attention to the disgruntled subordinate and is already waiting for the morning meeting to tell all the palaces about the boy. Nick wakes up and feels 100%. He slept for a whole day and now feels that his body is completely different. Peterson is happy. All his senses have become sharper. His internal energy has become stronger. His abilities are developing. He thinks that martial arts are awesome. Now he has definitely matured. Nick thinks about the effect of the miraculous pills and techniques from Chris. If this continues, he may become stronger than the heavenly demon. The main character thinks that this is unlikely. He is far from Jack, especially since Reed will soon come to the doctor's palace, since he needs the help of Nick himself. Then Peterson hears some kind of terrible roar, as if the house is falling apart. He hears someone saying that the palace was attacked, and runs in that direction. There is a man with a weapon standing near the palace. He asks to let him talk to DeFern. People around recognize this man as someone and ask him to put down his weapon and not make a mess here. Nick looks at the man and notices a child on his back, about the same age as the hero himself. The man who came continues to yell. He begs to see DeFern only once. He must know whether his daughter will survive. Peterson immediately thinks of a novel where there was an archer trying to save his daughter. The man rushes at the people who do not let him into the palace. He demands to bring the great healer. Nick realizes that he was not mistaken, and this man, Steve Howard, who kills people for money, fights even with outstanding martial artists. In the book, this man was the main enemy of this world. The doctors are trying to explain to Steve that they treat only those people who were reported to them. The palace only accepts those who could not be helped in the office. The man needs to bring an extract from there. Then they will get down to business. Nick remembers that someone attacked his daughter out of revenge, after which she died, and then Howard embarked on a slippery slope. According to the hero's recollections, the girl will die right here. He is trying to come up with a solution, planning to save the girl himself. Steve explains that they tried to get a discharge, but they were rudely refused, after which he tried for 10 days to cure her, 5 of which he got to the palace. He says that he tried to contact Jim Cox, but he said that he could not help because of his low position. Nick immediately remembers such a person in the book. Peterson feels sorry for the girl. He does not understand how, due to the lack of some papers, she can be denied help. Howard puts his daughter in front of him, kneels down and begs to save the girl's life. And Nick doesn't understand how the girl has survived so far. Nick thinks that seeing this in person is not at all like reading in a book. Only a teacher can solve this situation. Just in time, Dufern appears with Bob and says that he will examine the girl. Steve tells the doctor that his daughter was attacked by 7 people. Then Cox examined her and said that her internal organs were badly damaged. He gave her medicine, but it did not help. Chris examines the girl, tells her father that a miracle has happened since she is still alive, but unfortunately, it is too late to treat her, and he cannot help. Howard becomes enraged and rushes at the doctor. Everyone around is in shock. Nick realizes that Steve is mad. Bob intervenes in their fight and asks Howard to calm down, since he is on the territory of the doctor's palace. Peterson draws attention to the strength with which Bob holds the attacker's hand. He remembers that almost nothing is said about him in the novel and does not understand why, because the servant is very strong. Steve pulls his hand away and shouts at the doctor that he will die for not accepting his daughter, believing that Chris is not doing this for the money. Nick is ready to rush to defend his teacher. When he suddenly notices that the palace guards have lined up around his rivals, he understands that his help is not needed. Dufern, with a calm face, tries to explain to Howard that his daughter simply cannot be saved. Steve flares up in rage again, demanding that the two of them be killed here. Otherwise, he will kill everyone in the doctor's palace, and then he will get Jim Cox. Peterson notices that things are getting worse and wonders why Chris and Bob are acting as if nothing had happened. The doctor, with an arrogant face, warns Howard that in this case, his and his daughter's corpses will rot in the market square in front of everyone. Chris asks his opponent if it looks like he's joking. He doesn't answer, and Nick realizes that this is the first time he's seen such a chilling expression on the teacher's face. Howard reports that he has heard rumors about Chris's outstanding fighting abilities. He understands that he may die, but he is going to take one of these two with him to the next world. Nick doesn't understand why Steve stared at him at these words. He's afraid that he might become one of these two. Dufern notices that these words are just right for a demon archer, and his desire to take an innocent child hostage undermined his resolve. Bob understands that his master is going to kill Howard. Peterson cannot stand the tension and runs out onto the battlefield, shouting that he wants to examine the girl at least once. Absolutely everyone is shocked by this behavior, including the enemies who were just ready to kill each other. Chris asks the boy what he wants to say with these words. He replies that the girl really cannot be saved, but asks the teacher to take a risk and check again if there is at least the slightest chance of curing the girl. Dufern notices that Nick wants to say something else and asks to finish. Peterson states that he wants to convince Howard to take their side. The doctors take the girl away on a stretcher. Nick stands next to Steve and notices that he no longer has a drop of aggression, only the worried face of his parent. The main character decides that after all, this man did not want to take him hostage. Howard apologizes to the boy, saying that he has not been leading the best and most honest lifestyle for a long time, during which time his powers of observation have developed well. Steve says he flew into a rage because of Chris's gaze. His face seemed inhuman to him, as if he was wearing some kind of mask. The man had a feeling that the doctor would not budge even if he killed someone, anyone, except Nick himself. Peterson says that the teacher appreciates him very much, and Howard notes that until you reach such heights as Dufern, you will see a lot more death than an ordinary warrior. Steve reports that he knew that Chris was much more picky than the average person. Jim Cox was also strange, but at least he looked like a person. Dufern smiles the same in any situation. This infuriated Howard. He once again apologizes to Nick and asks him to save his daughter. He is ready to do anything for her. Nick notices that Chris's bad aura has filled the air around him and is stronger than any poison, so he decides it's time to get down to business. Chris and Nick are standing near the girl's bed in the operating room. The teacher asks if the boy can save this girl. He replies that he doesn't know yet. Peterson understands that without X-rays, computed tomography, magnetic resonance imaging, you can't look inside the body, but he can believe what was written in the novel. The boy asks Chris if it is possible to check the condition of the internal organs now, since this is the most important thing at the moment. Dufern replies that he can, and asks how he wants to conduct a more detailed examination and whether he wants to take his pulse, but Nick replies that he cannot do this himself yet. In the world of martial arts, there is an energy measurement of the pulse with which you can examine the body. Do something like an ultrasound, but with much more accurate results. This is done with the help of energy that spreads throughout the body, so the healer can feel what is happening in it. Chris conducts this examination on the body of Howard's daughter. Nick is glad to see such an amazing method in action. He carefully follows the teacher's movements and thinks that if he accumulates enough internal energy, he can do this too. After the procedure is completed, Dufern turns to Nick and Bob and warns them that what he is about to say should not leave this room. He talks about how the attacker dealt certain strong blows, after which there are no traces left, but they destroy internal organs. That person has a rather unique martial art technique. Nick, surprised, asks if this means that the enemy belongs to a certain clan. Chris answers positively, saying that this is Kanza, the union of 5 alliances. Peterson is even more surprised, because such cases are usually dealt with by Safa, which includes murderers, thieves, and criminals. He thinks that it doesn't matter at all who is behind this and what caused the hostility, because attacking a child will not justify anything. Nick remembers that in the novel, Howard never found the attackers, and if they are from Kanza, then no one will ever confess. Otherwise, they will be in big trouble. The boy says that the archer's business is his problem. Our business is saving the patient's life. He thinks that such indifference is unusual for children, reminds him of the bad side of his character, but this knowledge will be useful, and Chris agrees with his opinion. Chris said that the girl has tissue necrosis after an intestinal rupture. Surgery is possible, but it is not a fact that she will survive it. It is necessary to obtain permission from a family member for such a complex operation. Nick takes this task upon himself. Steve talks to the boy. Peterson says that there are 2 options. The first is a painless death. DeFern will perform an acupuncture session that will relieve his daughter of pain until her breathing stops. And the second way is to fight for her life to the end. They will perform an operation, but if it fails, the body can no longer be restored. And besides, this procedure is very painful. The archer begins to cry, but says that this is still 100 times better than the first doctor's statements that her illness cannot be cured. Steve asks if they will blame him if nothing works out. The boy says no because he is a stranger to him. He is also seeing his daughter for the first time, so the decision is only his, because only he knows her like no one else. Her father remembers that she is a very energetic girl, but he could not admit to her what he really does. She completely believed that her dad was a wandering warrior. She once said that she wanted to follow in his footsteps, would study martial arts and become a strong warrior. But one day her father did not have time to help, and she, bleeding in his arms, said that now she would not be able to become like him. But the archer himself understands perfectly well that he is a simple liar and a coward. He did not want to see condemnation in her eyes. He did not want to live in poverty. Howard cries, he asks to save her in order to correct the mistake of such an unworthy father as he, then begs to save his daughter. The man falls to his knees in front of Nick. He wonders why an innocent child should die instead of him. Chris asks the boy what his father answered. He says that he told him about the available options, and he chose that he needed to continue to fight. Then the doctor decides that he needs to hurry and orders Bob to prepare everything necessary. Nick thinks that there is nothing beautiful in hospitals, there is anxiety there, and all they can do is not give up. The boy understands that her liver, it turns out, had ruptured. It crumbled like tofu due to magic, and as a result, there was a perforation of the intestines. But it's surprising that the ribs were preserved. How she even managed to live for 15 whole days in this state, perhaps thanks to the internal energy and miraculous potions of her father. Nick realizes that she is very strong. The painkiller seems to have worked, and they were able to keep her alive. Bob brings a tube for a blood transfusion, trying to do everything as quickly as possible. Peterson does not understand how he did it so quickly. He thinks that he still has a lot to learn about Bob, because it only took him so much time to create one. It's incredible. Chris asks if they will give blood using this device. Nick says that's it, because if you don't give a transfusion, the girl will die. Peterson says that they will take blood from the father, connecting the veins. He says that he will do anything if it saves his daughter's life. Nick is standing in the operating room. It looks extremely awkward, but he is working like an adult. They are about to open the chest. The boy understands that even modern medicine cannot be compared with the level of accuracy here. Bob and Chris don't understand where the child got the skills of a man who has already performed many operations hundreds of times. They had never seen anything like it. His knowledge came from somewhere above. First, Bob will use his power to draw blood, toxins, and other fluids from the body. The archer will give his daughter his energy flow of blood to save her life. During the continuous transmission of that flow, the teacher will enhance the healing effect and thereby replenish her vital energy. They all gathered here to save the life of one only child. Chris notices that the pressure is dropping. He does not understand what went wrong. Nick discusses why this is happening, even if there is not enough blood yet, but it has clearly begun to penetrate the body. He thinks about why the pulse is dropping, and then, when he finds a solution, he plunges his hand into the insides to fix something inside. The others do not understand what he is doing. He takes out his hand and says that the spleen has ruptured. He only now realizes that they were too focused on the liver. It is still possible to save the girl, since her liver is recovering, but she will have to spend her whole life somewhere safe, always worrying and monitoring her health. Chris says it doesn't matter how bad the damage is, he thinks it can be managed without knife surgery. Nick doesn't understand how this can be possible. Chris says that the boy should rely on others, because even if the doctor is weak, it's not for nothing that his name is on everyone's lips. He can help in some way. Chris says that Peterson will soon be able to learn this technique too. It's like what he used on the tree, only he needs to learn how to use it on people. Nick thinks that the breakup happened in a good place, but this still does not detract from Chris's skill. It's not for nothing that he is the best healer in the world of martial arts. His reputation is deserved. He thinks that he needs to get ready. They are on an operation. They need to complete it quickly. The boy asks how long it lasted. He is squeezed like a lemon. The teacher says that he saved the child from death. This is worthy of praise. But Nick says that it is Defern who needs to be thanked. Chris says that this is not so, because once upon a time, and Peterson will be able to use this technique on him. Bob is trying to bring the archer back to consciousness. He also spent a lot of energy to save his daughter. Chris says that he also needs to lie down and falls exhausted. Nick tries to catch him in horror. Defern screamed heart-rendingly for help from the cold and torment like a knife blade, but no one was able to provide him with support. He tells the man that he's even gotten used to this feeling, but he says that his life will be short. Maybe he'll think about how he wants to live his remaining days. People say that the medicine contains poison, but it is used as a strong painkiller. But this is the only thing they can offer them. But the relatives of the patients who did not have long to live were not embarrassed by the use of such a medicine. He thinks it was probably because it dulled the pain a little. Chris remembers one time when no pain was felt at all. Then, standing near a pile of ashes and rubble, he swore revenge on those who burned his house and killed his relatives. After all, it was he who was destined to die first in the family, but everything turned out differently. Bob is carrying Chris on his back. He orders everyone to disperse because he is in critical condition. Nick is running behind them. Chris thinks that he was delighted with the boy at first sight. Perhaps it was because he had something that Defern himself was deprived of, strangely. But today, the pain is less. The doctor wakes up, remembering home. He sees Nick on his knees in front of his bed. He wonders if he was there all the time. Bob says that the boy was stubborn and came up with absurd reasons to stay. Said that he wanted to cure him with the help of the 5 elements. Begins to say that he was to blame for what happened, but Chris interrupts him with his hand. Nick seems to be sleeping. The amount of energy that he was able to transfer to Chris hardly helped in any way, but still the pain subsided, perhaps due to his attempts to restore the balance disturbed in his body. Defern says that his temperament is similar to that of a healer, but their energy is different. Chris gets up and realizes that he can still transfer some energy, even despite all Bob's requests to rest. The doctor says that for the first time in a long time, he has a desire to live, because he would like to see how Nick grows up and reveals himself. Chris asks the boy that he is already on his feet and says that he was probably scared when he suddenly lost consciousness. Nick says that fortunately, everything worked out, although he was very scared and worried about the teacher. The boy thinks that this is putting it mildly. He has already lost patience, but then it felt like he was losing a parent. He grew up in an orphanage and always felt like something was missing, like a thirst that couldn't be quenched. He thinks maybe it was weakened because of Chris. Defern thinks it's a strange thing, these feelings. He's sorry that he makes others worry, but at the same time, he's very pleased to see that they care. Now, Chris understands why the clan elders pretend to be sick in front of their pupils. The old man grumbles in the hope of attracting attention to himself. He did not think that this would overtake him too. While he was thinking about this, he started coughing up a bloody cough due to his illness. Nick is horrified by what is happening. The boy brings Bob to the doctor. They look at him and freeze in horror. They try to revive him by pouring water and feeding him pills. They even try to get him to drink by screaming. Chris is unconscious again, and his associates are thinking about his fate. Bob says that he should have helped him. Nick understands that this is not what happened to him in the first, and also that in the novel, everything was described more simply. In reality, everything looks much worse. The description of the events there did not cause any special emotions, because although he was an incredible character, he was still a minor one, and he died almost at the beginning. Breathing returns to normal. Bob says that the teacher needs rest, but he says that he and Nick immediately need to begin the next stage of training. Chris says where else can Nick find a patient like this to train on? They have the same energy, so if you make a mistake, there will be almost no bad consequences. The boy already knows the theory. Now he needs to close his eyes and, following the training, reveal his inner strength. Nick releases energy blasts into his teacher's body, restoring his strength. The boy is reminded of the ultrasonic waves he saw in his past life. He felt his body from the inside as his inner force moves according to plan. And here is the pulse of blood energy, through which energy circulates. Even to him it is clear how serious the teacher is. Now he just needs to finish what he started with the help of the power given to him. Chris asks how he is. Nick says he didn't think it was that bad. DeFern says that there is really nothing to hide from his student. He says that he will cure his teacher. He says that it seemed to him that he would be scared, but he only gained more confidence. Nick takes his teacher by the hand and says that he will cure him no matter what. The father clings to his daughter, who has just recovered. He does not believe that Jessica can be alive, and she asks him to stop crying and apologizing, because everything is already fine. Steve cries more and more and squeezes his daughter in his arms. She even says that it's hard for her to breathe from his tenderness. The girl feels that there is much more energy inside her than before, and his energy is there too. But Dad will no longer be able to use his magic because of this. Chris is surprised that she is already so much better that she was able to get up. Steve runs to the doctors. He says that, thanks to them, his daughter survived. He is their huge debtor and falls to his knees. The girl continues to ask her father to stop crying because she is doing much better, but now she is worried about him. The archer says that he thinks he won't be able to use the same power as before, but the main thing is that the daughter is alive, and the remaining power is also enough. He thinks that this is due to the fact that the boy used innate magic. Since their first meeting, his appearance has changed a lot, which is quite understandable, because a person's innate energy differs in strength from ordinary energy, which, by the way, would be enough for treatment. But now, the archer has become an ordinary warrior. The father says that Jessica said that her strength has grown. Nothing has ever pleased him as much as this news. Chris asks permission to check his daughter's pulse, then tells her to sit still. The master, who has reached the maximum of his strength, has become an ordinary warrior. Touchingly, he would have turned out to be a villain. In his current state, he can easily succumb to influence. Usually, the villains in martial arts novels show outstanding energy at the beginning, which eventually becomes the basis for the protagonist's powers to awaken. He probably could have taken the role of the one who would sacrifice himself. Countless murders would have tempered him, made him stronger. But you can never know for sure at what moment someone who was your enemy may become an ally, even though negative characters are sometimes annoying, but they are considered the coolest. In the novel, he appears before the confrontation with the heavenly demon, so he could be suitable for the role of a villain. Besides, he lost his martial arts, so it will be necessary to make sure that he does not become a villain. Chris examines the girl and reports that all her smallest veins are open. The father does not believe his ears and asks again several times. DeFern explains that Jessica was on the verge of death for 15 days. They kept her alive with the help of powers, miraculous drugs, and various techniques, and only after that she received her father's innate blood. Chris warns that the smallest veins are open temporarily, so if you leave everything as is, they will close again. He plans to supply the girl with internal energy in the next 10 days. Peterson adds that the doctors will help her with this, and after the course expires, she will be able to live with the smallest veins open. Jessica cries and thanks her rescuers. Her father joins in his kind words. Nick says that since the girl survived, then everything will be fine. And Chris reports that his contribution in this case, to be honest, was not that significant, so only Peterson needs to be thanked. The girl approaches Nick and again warmly thanks him. He tries to say something about her father's participation in this matter. The boy understands that Jessica lasted so long, and her smallest veins began to change because she, despite her age, is very strong. Peterson concludes that the girl has the makings of greatness, which are visible already in childhood, since she was able to survive in battle against the Great Kaza. Nick thinks about the fact that he and this girl are the same age. He is sure that if she continues to strive for heights, her name will be on the lips of every resident. The main character is very glad that with one good deed, he was able to help both the demon archer and the future goddess of the bow. Chris and the student say goodbye to Jessica and Steve, saying that they need to rest well. When they leave the room, Nick asks his teacher not to forget about rest. Peterson decides that things are going very well, and now he just needs to prevent the archer's unfortunate fate. The boy walks with Howard Sr. He says that he does not know what to do next. He used to want to take revenge, but now he is afraid that he does not have enough strength for this. He says that he often saw how warriors, following instructions from first-class masters, became third-rate fighters, and what they then ended up with. Steve says that now everything is not so bad for him, since thanks to Nick, his daughter was able to avoid death, and for the parent, the rest is not important. Now Howard has only one desire, to be with Jessica until his death. Peterson realizes that now that he is weakened and unlikely to die a natural death, Kaza's villains may continue to pursue him. Then everything will happen as it happened in the novel. Steve lost the fight with the heavenly demon, lost his strength, took everything for granted, and became the same third-rate fighter that I just talked about. Nick is not going to allow this, and decides to act now. He turns to Howard with a request to listen to him. The boy first asks Steve to tell him about the principle of his energy attack. Howard is surprised by this request, but says that his family has a moving energy attack, which allows them to attack cyclically. Steve even wants to demonstrate his technique, but unfortunately, he does not have a bow with him. Nick says he only wanted to see it, not learn it, so he asks Howard to show him the moves on an imaginary bow. Steve warns that he has never done this, but is ready to try. He asks the boy not to judge the other shooters by him. Howard reveals that his technique is called the Divine Bow of Destruction. His clan comes from a Buddhist family whose goal was to achieve nirvana through awareness, which grows from selflessness. The archer shows the movements, communicating that by repeating the same thing, he falls into self-oblivion and can use an energy attack. Nick watches silently and thinks that Steve must have spent almost all his strength, since the boy himself does not feel the internal energy in his movements. Steve continues to repeat the same movements. His body begins to emit weak energy. Nick thinks that this may be his last energy attack. After a while, Peterson feels a bow and arrow in Howard's hands. He sees their energy silhouette. Nick carefully watches the archer, who concentrates on his stance and breathing, and releases an imaginary arrow into the bamboo. The boy sees that there are no arrows or a bow, only a refined technique of movements, the result of which will be mental anguish and doubts. Movements that he repeated hundreds of times, a matter of technique, like a prayer that he read thousands of times, mental anguish akin to wind and thunder, which are destined to meet lightning. The essence of the divine bow of destruction technique is endless giving, and when you give, there is no need to accumulate internal energy. Nick concludes that archery, in which you rely only on your strength, is akin to emptiness and is not the highest level of skill, as he previously thought. He also understands that in this matter it is actually his own soul that must be given. Peterson feels an incredibly powerful energy wave emanating from Howard, which was not described so colorfully in the novel. The boy understands that the man has reached the highest level, which is called the spiritual bow. Howard rises into the air. Nick is shocked that he was able to reach the last step of the Eightfold Path, which brings a person close to nirvana. Peterson remembers that in the novel Steve never reached this stage, and concludes that he succeeded and did everything well. He was able to revive the power of the demon archer. Suddenly, Bob appears behind the boy and says that he really is an unpredictable person, and Nick himself is surprised at the noiselessness of the guy's movement. Bob says that he thought that after losing his inner energy, Steve would soon become incapacitated, but he received an epiphany, and all his wounds were healed, and he also grew in his skills. The minion praises Nick for the work he did first on Conson, and now the archer. Peterson notices some coldness in Bob's words. This confuses him. He says that it seems to him that the guy did not come here to admire him. He agrees, saying that he was watching the boy and thinking. Nick asks what Bob was thinking about. He replies that he is deciding whether to kill the boy or not. Peterson gets chills. He feels the guy's sinister energy, and he starts laughing. He understands that Bob is not joking, although now he wants to make it all funny. Nick asks why he wanted to kill him. The guy says that this is due to the fact that his owner almost lost his life, and also since the boy is next to Chris, he constantly overcomes himself. This is repeated and will only end with his death. Peterson himself understands that when a patient with a limited lifespan takes on a student, he thereby agrees to die even earlier. It is not surprising that it was his fault that the teacher almost died this time. Nick says that if Bob kills him, the teacher will not sit idly by. The guy agrees. He understands that the owner will kill him in such a cruel way that it's hard to imagine. The boy believes that his teacher is not so cruel, but Bob claims that Nick does not know the owner well. He would be cruel to him for murder. Peterson questions the servant's loyalty, and Bob says that he doesn't care how he dies, because the boy's death may give Chris the opportunity to live longer. Bob says he's not sure it's time to kill Nick yet, so he'll just keep watching him for now. 3 hours after the demon archer awakens, Peterson notices that his hair has darkened again, and Steve himself has looked younger. Nick congratulates the archer, who thanks him and reports that he was able to achieve the highest level of martial arts. The main character recalls that in the novel, everyone dreamed of rising to this level, but only 30 people were able to achieve it. Peterson thinks that he expected Steve to simply regain his vitality, but the actual result exceeded all expectations. Howard kneels before the boy, saying that only he gave him a helping hand when Steve needed it most. not only saved his daughter, but also helped him reach a level that the archer could only dream of. Nick realizes that the man is now on his hook. He asks Howard to get up, as he is very embarrassed. Steve says that Peterson can ask for anything. He is ready to repay at any cost, even if it takes his whole life. The boy is trying to say that the treatment has already been paid for with money. But there is nothing to pay for the strength at all, because Nick just wanted to watch his attack. Howard understands that this is just a boy in front of him. He offers to serve Peterson faithfully until the end of his days and pay at least a tiny part of his due. Nick tries to be indignant, but in his thoughts he was glad that everything was going so well he couldn't even count on this. As Howard and Peterson approach the palace, the boy tells the archer that Chris is going to offer him a position in the infirmary. Steve is surprised, and Nick says that this is an excellent and safe job. The man will only have to deliver medicinal herbs and medical notices. Howard immediately understands why the boy asked him to demonstrate strength. He tells him that he will gladly agree to this job. Nick is happy that he was able to lure a strong intelligence officer who has reached the highest level, and his daughter, who also has superpowers, into the infirmary. Now he understands why the heavenly demon had to suffer with them. For demonic martial arts, the divine bow of destruction is like rat poison. He remembers that in the novel, Jack will soon rise to a junior leader and bloodshed will begin, in which many people will be drawn. During the Great War, which is just around the corner, Nick must ensure the safety of the infirmary. Preparations are already gradually underway. DeFern is talking about something with Howard. Bob plays the role of a waiter. Peterson, meanwhile, meditates, thinking that at this rate it will take him 6 months to reach the third element of the 5 elements. Nick recalls that Chris once told him that Bob was not able to know the power of the 5 elements, and therefore he was studying other martial arts. Bob's ability to control blood and other fluids found in the human body is most likely related to demonic martial arts. Peterson recalls that the guy remained sane at the sight of blood. It is quite difficult to remain calm during the operation, but he assisted very well. Moreover, if you need to make something, Bob can easily cope with the task in a day. The more Nick thinks about it, the more clearly he realizes that the guy is an extraordinary person. A few days later, Bob tells the boy that he clearly wants to die young. The guy gets angry and punches the wall. He angrily asks why Nick said something to the teacher. It turns out that yesterday, Peterson, at dinner with Chris, announced that Bob would now study the medical arts from him, as he said that he wanted to improve his skills in order to save as many patients as possible. DeFern was very happy. He turns to Bob and says that he can't believe that he has developed an interest in medicine. Bob doesn't understand what Peterson is up to, and decides to tell his owner the truth and then rip this little guy's head off his shoulders. It's better than learning medicine from him. Nick overtakes the guy and tells the teacher that they decided to join forces to save Chris's own life. Bob sees his owner so joyful for the first time, he understands that no matter how hard he tries, he will never be able to achieve such feelings. And this boy said only a few words, and that's it. The next day, Bob is ready to kill the boy with one wave of his finger. He asks Nick to explain himself. The guy believes that the boy is not so brave as to do this just for the sake of ridicule. He suggests that the goal could be a desire to reduce his influence in the infirmary, because in such places, power struggles are common. But something tells him that the reason was different. He notices how the boy is trembling with fear, asks how such a coward decided to do this. After some doubt, Peterson asks the official Bob to become a warrior of the infirmary. He says that he needs a nurse who will assist him. Nick understands that there are no nurses in this world. Usually the doctor is helped by his student, that is, a novice doctor. He tells Bob that the time will soon come when he will have to pick up a scalpel, and he will need an assistant who will try his best. The official is very surprised that Peterson chose him, because they are enemies. He asks the boy why he should keep such a person nearby, and Nick replies that Bob has qualities that others do not have. Nick begins to list the guy's advantages. The first thing he notes is stamina. Bob stands on his feet all day long, doing errands for patients and the infirmary, and all sorts of other hard work. The second is composure. Sometimes it happens that the patient is in critical condition, and a good reaction is needed to make a decision and save him. After watching Bob, Nick can say that he is worthy of trust. The last thing Nick says is that Bob will need medical knowledge, and this is the most important part. Peterson considers the official an ideal candidate, and in his thoughts he dreams of finding out what martial arts Bob's technique belonged to, demonic, magical, or ordinary. The official asks if Nick's intentions are really that, and he says with a displeased face that they at least have to save the teacher. Peterson tells Bob that no matter how much he racks his brain, no one else comes to mind except him. Bob is shocked by the boy's words, because he was going to kill him, and has not yet decided whether he has changed his mind. Nick says that he knows that Bob is ready to do anything to save the teacher, but the boy himself is also ready to do anything, even risk his life. Bob feels like this kid is suppressing his will. He doesn't understand how this is possible. Peterson asks the guy to first become his nurse, not to kill him until they cure the teacher, and if that doesn't work, then he can do as he knows. Bob is very angry, and Nick warns him to keep in mind that it is now more difficult to kill him, since his confidant is a demon archer who has reached the highest level. The official is very doubtful. He does not understand why the boy is so eager to save the teacher. He is frightened by the boy's honesty, and in general, there is a feeling that Nick seems to be in control of his entire life and decisions. Bob gives in. He accepts Peterson's proposals, but he still laughs at the fact that the boy makes such an offer to a man who is ready to kill him at any moment. Nick says that he is not at all trying to show mercy in this way or to say that he forgives him. He just considered this option the most advantageous. The main character is going to behave as usual in public, since it is beneficial for him that others consider him a nice boy. Bob is shocked and realizes that Nick will mock him in private, and Peterson himself asks him not to forget, because the guy said he would kill him, therefore, he has the right to treat him as he wants. Nick thinks that Bob has a much harder job than ordinary nurses, and when he leaves, he tells him that he will continue to save lives, and the guy will have a lot to learn from today. Peterson, turning his back on the official, tells him that if he has a claim, it's better to kill now before it's too late. Bob restrains himself. It seems to him that he is finally beginning to understand why the demon archer swore allegiance to this boy. The guy even begins to admire Nick, because despite his fear, he did not chicken out and lured the enemy to his side. It didn't take long for the news of Peterson's treatment method to spread among people. His technique was recorded and officially made public. Of course, details were omitted, but information was given about the patient's condition, and the treatment itself was described in general terms. People were very surprised that the infirmary was able to cure serious damage to internal organs, from the liver to the spleen. It is not stated who the patient was, but many guessed that it was the daughter of a demon archer. They heard that he sought treatment from Jim Cox, who did not want to help them, and simply left the girl to die. Now people understand why Christopher cares so much about his student. They also have information that this boy is still just a child. He is not yet 12 years old. People don't believe what happened even more. One guy says that he even wanted to return to the palace to personally learn his new method from the boy. He offers to send carrier pigeons there. The announcement from the palace shocked all the residents. Some people condemn Jim for not accepting the daughter of a demon archer. Someone suggests that the hospital owned by Cox simply did not have enough skills to cure the girl, so they disowned her under another pretext. The news about the new technique passed from mouth to mouth, and eventually families who trusted their health to other hospitals began to think about renewing the contract with Defern. In the Cox infirmary, the news is perceived very negatively. The chief cannot understand how it happened that Defern bypassed him. The official of the infirmary, Leslie Potter, attacks his subordinates in a rage. We are talking about a demon archer. He believes that his daughter was taken here for 10 whole days, so there can be no talk of any hidden intentions. Someone says that everyone knows that keeping a patient with severe injuries to internal organs for 10 days is not the responsibility of hospitals. Another guy shouts out that if Cox's infirmary didn't agree to accept the archer because he worked for Safa, then they should have told him about it immediately and not kept the girl useless. The official is furious at the words of his workers. He believes that all these are intrigues set up by the infirmary Defern. In his announcement, he seemed to want to show that there is rivalry between the infirmaries. But Leslie understands that the announcement did not contain a word about their infirmary. There were only a few words about the patient's condition. He does not know why rumors about them began. Someone tells Potter the information that they managed to find out. The patient is the daughter of an archer. Leslie does not understand how it was possible to accept a patient who was almost certainly going to die. The servant says that due to what happened, many medicinal rooms are now in panic, and some clans have begun to show interest in the new method. Leslie is in despair. He does not have the courage to meet Mr. Jim Cox. He is sure that if he comes to him with such news, it will not end well. The guy tells his boss that he also heard that the current situation is extremely strange, since until this moment, the Defern hospital was not strong in such operations. The ad also praised the medical skills of Chris's student, but there is a possibility that he used officially unconfirmed treatment methods on the patient. Leslie clings to this idea. He asks again if there is confirmed information about such an operation, but his interlocutor says that there was no such information. Potter orders the guy to send several of their doctors with hanging tongues to the Defern infirmary. The servant asks under what pretext to do this, Leslie reports the version that Dufern endangered the patient's life by using unknown techniques on him, and he also thinks that if they had another 10 days, they might also be able to cure Jessica. The guy says that even if the patient was not accepted in the infirmary, he could have been cured in the medicine room, but the demon archer simply did not wait and left. Leslie agrees that this version is better, saying that then their doctors arrived at the Dufern infirmary because they were worried about the patient's condition, so they definitely wouldn't be kicked out. And if they kick them out anyway, then this will become fertile ground for growing rumors. Cox's infirmary must annoy them in any way so that the clans do not rewrite their treaties. Potter asks to make good preparations for such an important matter. The servant accepts the order and says that he will report to him when everything is ready. Nick thinks that the teacher's condition is much worse than he expected. He still lacks the internal energy and understanding of technology to be able to carry out the operation alone, so he needs to become stronger as quickly as possible. He managed to reach a level where he himself can create and control the wind energy that he absorbed thanks to the demon archer. Peterson rises into the air, training the third element. He realizes that he just has to learn how to use this power correctly. Changing the green energy to bright red, Nick decides to try to combine these two forces first. The boy succeeds in his plan. He directs these two intertwining energies into the tree. The bark on the tree all cracks, leaving a dent. Nick is delighted with the effect. He sees that this combination is capable of creating a powerful destructive force. The boy notices a huge burn on his hand. Although he was careful, he still got hurt. Nick understands that the second-degree burn will not go away on its own, and the blisters will remain. He is glad that he has already been able to learn how to disinfect wounds. First, the boy directs the energy of water into his hand to reduce the heat, and then of wood, which will restore the skin. Looking at the result, Peterson is quite satisfied. The result, of course, is not ideal, but thanks to his mastery of the three elements, everything will heal in 2 days. Nick decides that it's time to start mastering the fourth element. He puts his hand to the tree, realizing that the warrior's training ends when he manages to destroy something, after which the healer's training begins. Half a month has passed since the demon archer's daughter received treatment. Jessica is sitting in her room. Despite the fact that exposed tiny veins provide restorative power superior to that of a human, it should not be forgotten that the injuries this girl suffered were far from a typical case. Until Jessica fully recovered, she approached martial arts practice with caution. She tries to remember what kind of scumbag brought her to such a state. The girl wants to find and tear this squalor into pieces. But due to the shock, Jessica's memories of what happened are extremely blurry. She remembers that he was wearing a mask, and it is impossible to recognize him by his appearance. After that day, her world seemed to collapse, but she understands that this is reality. Jessica goes outside and is very happy because she feels much better in the fresh air. She notices that the weather is beautiful today and decides to take a walk around the area. The first thing the girl pays attention to is the number of people working in the infirmary. Then she sees doctors carrying a wounded man. He is screaming in pain, and they are trying to stop the bleeding. Jessica feels some kind of squeezing feeling. She realizes that she was able to survive, but someone's life will end here. Her heart shrinks. The girl notices the appearance of Dufern and Peterson. She recognizes them, and they begin to save the man. Jessica notices that the boy is cute, and what happens on the operating table takes her breath away. Now she understands what the daily life of doctors looks like. After some time, the girl notices Nick. She spies on him, and is very surprised that after such hard work he is also training. The girl admires Peterson's diligence, because he doesn't rest at all day. She understands that he is truly an outstanding boy. Even her father bowed his head to him. Jessica is shocked that they are almost the same age, but concludes that he was taught completely different things. She thinks about how to make friends correctly, because in her entire life she has never had any, since she spent all her free time honing her skills. The girl had to constantly lie to her father so that he would think that everything was fine with her and that she was a good daughter. But in reality, she was always a loner who tried to survive with all her might. The next morning, Nick stretches and yawns, glad that he has already done all his morning chores and thinks about going for a walk. Then an archer attracts his attention. He is carrying a huge container of medicine. The boy is surprised by his strength. Peterson is afraid that at this rate, with such a heavy load, his body may not be able to withstand this slave labor. Be that as it may, and it was possible to wait until his daughter fully recovered, Nick concludes that the teacher is not familiar with mercy. Peterson is upset that Steve works like hell in the infirmary, and Jessica spends her days practicing breathing exercises to circulate internal energy. Nick goes to the girl's room. He is very surprised by the arrival of the gentleman, and he asks to call him simply by his name. Jessica can't afford this because he's her savior, and Peterson thinks that they're both little kids, and there's no need for such formalities. The boy hands her a tray with a mug and asks the girl to drink tea, which will give her vigor. While Jessica drinks tea, Nick thinks about whether he is a little brother for the Constant sisters or an older brother for Jack, who he will become for this girl. Peterson asks Jessica how she would like to address him, because it would be great if she chooses. The girl doubts for a long time and eventually says that she wants to contact him, friend. Nick did not expect such an answer. A very embarrassed Jessica tells the boy that it is her secret, but she has always dreamed of a friend. Nick doesn't believe that such a girl has never had friends. She is even more embarrassed. The girl says that due to the fact that her father was constantly traveling, she did not have the opportunity to meet children from military families. She also spent all her free time practicing archery every day. Peterson is upset by the girl's confessions. He understands that she was very lonely and concludes that the archer made a useless parent. Nick extends his hand to the girl, offering her friendship. Jessica is very happy that her dream has come true. The girl asks not to tell her dad anything of what he just heard. He promises to keep her secret and pretend to be one of her many friends. Jessica says no, calling the boy special and saying that he will always remain that way to her. It's very painful for Peterson to watch this child who had to grow up so early. He invites Jessica to go play outside. He is delighted with his proposal, and he decides that nothing will happen if he rests for a day. They think about what to play. Nick says that they need to choose something where they do not need to use internal energy. The girl decides that it is because she has not recovered, but the boy warns her that this is not the problem. You just can't use them unnecessarily. One day followed another, and soon the child became a teenager. Nick sits in the mountains meditating and thinks that winter has already opened the door and brought its gifts. He can't believe that the couple of months he's been in this world have flown by so quickly. Every single day he tried to surpass his former self, completely oblivious to the passage of time. It's amazing that in just a few months you can gain so much strength. This place is filled with the principles of the 5 elements. After he mastered them masterfully and strengthened his body, he achieved synergy. Here his thoughts are interrupted. As he notices some very powerful energy, he even gets goosebumps from this power. Peterson tries to look for a person who has such power, but he doesn't see anyone. He is sure that it was not his imagination, and he felt something in that direction. He thinks he made a mistake since he is a newbie, and it wouldn't be surprising. Every morning he spent 4 hours doing breathing exercises to circulate his internal energy, which had now reached a good level. He also constantly took miracle pills and other various medicines, and did not forget about his daily training. It was difficult for him to even imagine how quickly his internal energy was accumulating. In 6 months, his energy increased to a volume that is usually mastered in 15 years. Nick considers himself unique. Today is the day Peterson officially became a doctor. People gather in the courtyard, including the 4 heads of the department that manage the infirmary. Nick is worried. Bob asks the guy to follow him and says that since he is just starting work, his official status is uncertain. The official also believes that the very fact that the intern was allowed into the infirmary is an outrageous absurdity. However, Peterson managed to save a patient whom even the teacher could not help, and he also managed to save the life of the archer's daughter. So today, a meeting will be held where the guy's status will be determined. High-ranking people sit down at the tables. Nick feels tension in the air. The first Nick notices is the head of the acupuncture department, Kyle Morris, an older man with a long mustache and an arrogant look. He then looks over at Cody Morgan, who runs the physical strength division. The man is quite young and has an eye patch over one eye. The youngest of the managers turns out to be Larry Evans. He runs the massage division. The last manager turns out to be an elderly woman, Ava Mitchell, who manages medicines. Nick recognizes her. This lady gave him all sorts of unusual sweets. Bob notices Nick's interest in the woman and remembers that they have already met. He tells the guy that Mitchell has a very good reputation. There is no one in the infirmary who dislikes her. She is a specialist in the manufacture of medicines, very prudent and is on good terms with many large merchants, and she also has a gift for finding medicinal herbs that other infirmaries cannot find. A great-looking Chris DeFern walks into the room and everyone folds their hands in front of him. He, not paying attention to his subordinates, takes his place at the head of the hall and proposes to start the meeting. Bob goes to the center of the hall with a piece of paper and reports the first news, paying special attention to the fact that this year there will be a Congress of the Dragon and the Phoenix. Peterson immediately recalls the novel, which stated that the Dragon and Phoenix is a fighting tournament in which young rising stars of various clans take part. Chris asks how many participants there will be this year. Bob reports that the size of the event will be similar to last year. Morris invites the drug department to help his unit, as extra hands will come in handy. Mitchell reports that there will be many young talents from the Hai Tang family present in the upcoming tournament, so they may have a hard time. Kyle turns to Evans and asks for help from his unit. He says that he is ready to send his guys. They can help with the movement of patients. Each of the division leaders expressed their opinion. The meeting went smoothly. They dealt with all the matters in order, and the time had come to discuss the most important things. Bob reports that next on the agenda is a decision concerning the situation of young Mr. Peterson. DeFern stands up and says he thinks he should speak first. He begins his speech. Their infirmary began its journey from the infirmary of the Chagall family. If Chagall had at least one more descendant, perhaps the name of the infirmary could be preserved. However, of those in whom Chagall's blood flows, only Chris himself remains. He thanks the leaders for being with him from the very beginning. Otherwise, their infirmary would no longer exist now. DeFern reports that, thinking about the future, he decided to take on a student. Nick turned out to be very insightful, and he also has medical techniques that are very different from theirs. Today, he called them together because he believes that this guy's skill is up to the level, sufficient to create a new division. Next, Chris invites leaders to speak out. Morris believes that a teacher should be judicious in choosing his student, and he, in turn, should make great efforts to take care of the mentor. He recognizes the child's wisdom and is confident that Nick was the one who healed Steve Howard's daughter, but Kyle believes that the guy is still too young. Morris understands that his medical techniques are amazing, but many of them have not been proven. The responsibility for the lives of patients lies with all employees. They cannot just use unproven techniques. Kyle proposes to create a new unit when the young master's skill is confirmed. Peterson is upset by the words of the head of acupuncture, but he understands that he judged everything correctly. Nick is afraid that proving his medical skills will require a huge amount of time, which the teacher may not have. Larry Evans intervenes in the conversation. He says that we should not forget that no one has ever heard of Peterson's techniques before. He reports that even one of Norwood Gray's 3 generations of infirmaries does not know such techniques, so they doubt who this young master really is. Nick understands what an awkward position he found himself in. He already subconsciously knew that there was no need to bring up this conversation, since no matter what his situation was suspicious. Bob approaches Evans and says that regarding the last remark, he can give his guarantees. He says that he has his own methods, and he has already checked everything. The young gentleman does not threaten the owner. Larry bows his head and says that since the official himself vouches for the guy, he now has no suspicions about the true identity of their benefactor. Nick is shocked that Bob's words are enough for the manager to simply hush up this topic. He has the feeling that he still does not fully understand this man. The young official's assurance calmed the situation in the meeting room. Even Morris calmed down his stubbornness and changed his point of view regarding Peterson. DeFern gets up from the table and sums up the results. From this day, the new surgery unit will begin its work. The head of the unit will be Nick Peterson. He will write books on surgical techniques, which he will use to teach his art in the infirmary, while at the same time proving his competence. After the meeting, Chris approaches Nick and asks how he sees the infirmary. This question takes the guy by surprise. DeFern says that even though Peterson hasn't been in the infirmary for very long and still doesn't know much, he has definitely seen and experienced something. So he became very interested in what the infirmary looks like in his eyes. The guy answers in a confident voice that for him, he is like a watercourse in a river. Chris and Bob are very surprised by this answer. One does not understand why the comparison is made with a watercourse, and not with a mountain or the sea. And the second believes that the watercourse of a river is a place where pirates gather, and is in no way associated with an infirmary. Nick says that life can be compared to the flow of water, whose path lies in the mountains and ends in the sea, after which the water evaporates, becomes rain, and again descends into the mountains. The river is the bridge between the beginning and the end, and pirates are nasty creatures blocking river flow. The teacher laughs at this explanation and concludes that the infirmary is a place where bad pirates gather and interfere with the flow of the river. Peterson says that Chris was wrong, and pirates are those people who seek satisfaction in conflicts with anything that floats by. They extort money and jewelry. DeFern tells the guy that if, in his opinion, the infirmary is a watercourse, then Nick himself, who has become one of the leaders, is now, one might say, the head of the pirates. He means that there will be a difficult time ahead of them. Nick replies that this is probably why his chest was tightening at the meeting. Chris says that this is how it should be, because the doctor only needs to be responsible for the life of the patient in front of him. But the head of the department must be responsible for the lives of all the patients in the infirmary. A leader must be firm and decisive, which can make him proud, but there is no need to show it off. DeFern, pointing to the departing Bob, says that if Peterson wants him to call him a benefactor and not just a master, even in a personal meeting, then he will have to try hard. Nick thinks about how difficult it is for a teacher, because he is responsible for the entire department of the infirmary. The guy sits in his room and does not understand where he can find time to sleep, train, and write books on surgery. The latter is important for the rise of his unit. He is very angry. Ahead of him is the development of time management techniques, otherwise he will not have time to do anything. Peterson recalls that at night he still needs to share knowledge with the teacher. He also needs to set aside time for this, a crazy daily routine. The only thing that makes the guy happy is the presence of a pencil, since writing with it is much faster than with local brushes, which need to rub the ink. He thinks that he should distribute the pencils, which also write well on bamboo paper, throughout the infirmary. The guy has a very difficult time writing, since most of his medical knowledge can only be described in a foreign language. Everything will need to be somehow translated into local terminology so that everyone understands the meaning. After some thought, he decides to rewrite the words from their sound, since there are still no analogs. A few days later, Nick meets with Bob in the infirmary courtyard for his first training session as a unit leader. The official tells the guy that Cody, Morgan, and Chris have decided to personally welcome him here, so he needs to try hard. Peterson understands the responsibility. Perhaps if he makes a mistake, Morgan will immediately quit teaching him. Maybe this is his goal. Bob admires the guy's skill. Having learned one thing, he immediately understands another. But Peterson hardly realizes how much the leaders of 4 generations want to get their hands on him. He is like sugar for ants. Nick recalls that at the meeting, the head of physical strength was indifferent because his unit was more interested in the safety of the infirmary itself than the patients. Bob says that the guy has nothing to worry about because he can handle even a warrior without resorting to killing. In the infirmary, all units are worried about whether he is qualified enough. It just manifests itself differently for everyone. Nick thinks that this is because they are in a city where even healers are endowed with battle courage, and despite the fact that they are not warriors, time does not make them more cowardly. Peterson says that he likes it here. Bob notices that he speaks like a teacher. This makes him happy. Nick is surprised, and the official reports that Chris once mentioned that this is the only place he likes. The guy understands that this is cool, but he and the teacher here like completely different things. Peterson is tired of standing, and in a dissatisfied voice asks Bob how long he can stand like this, because it's still a training suit, and it will wrinkle anyway, so there's no need to worry so much about its appearance. Chris and Cody arrive at the training ground. Peterson stands on a bamboo peg. The official throws metal balls at the guy, which he must dodge. Nick is unhappy that Bob is throwing harder this time than in their previous training sessions. He is worried that he will embarrass himself in front of the teacher. After finishing Nick's training demonstration, the teacher says that his work is very worthy. Cody agrees with him. Morgan pays attention to the guy's excellent technique. He avoided attacks without a single hesitation, absolutely naturally, as if water. The leader does not understand how it was possible to achieve such skill in a few months. He tells the others that if he hadn't seen everything with his own eyes, he definitely wouldn't have believed it. And he also notes the guy's not ideal physique. Chris replies that in this regard, Nick is unremarkable, but what he has is enough for training. In martial arts, internal energy plays the most important role, which is why noble families are not particularly interested in physique. Morgan, with a dissatisfied face, wonders if Chris meant that Cody's approach was wrong. DeFern answers in the negative. A strong body helps internal energy accumulate better, and it is also a good bonus for a future family. But strength does not lie in physique alone. The teacher puts his hand on Nick's head and says that he has, to some extent, already mastered the technique of a confident step. The guy is very glad that Chris thinks so. DeFern believes that now it is the turn to move on to studying the blurred step technique. He warns the guy that this one is many times more difficult than the previous one. Nick looks surprised and asks what kind of technique this is. In fact, he knows the answer from the book, but he understands that at such moments it is important to pretend that he doesn't know anything. Chris says that this next step after the confident step, his paths, which at the beginning were only 3, reach the phase of the blurred step and diversify even more. When Peterson masters the blurry step, much more progress awaits him. Nick wonders what comes after it. DeFern says that when the guy reaches its 12th stage, he will be able to begin the technique of the blurred step of heavenly energy, and this can already be called the absolute teaching of divine power. Bob compliments the owner's words, saying that in the whole world, there are not even 5 step techniques that could come close in power to the blurred step of heavenly energy. Nick already knows everything that was just told to him. The blurred celestial energy step among all the step techniques is the highest link. The whole problem is that the technique that is the bridge to the transition is terribly complex. Peterson asks the teacher if he can continue practicing his confident stride for now. Morgan considers the guy's behavior astounding, since usually students from military families are eager to move on to the next stage as quickly as possible. Chris is very surprised and asks Nick why he decided so. The guy replies that the more he practices the confident step technique, the more difficult it seems to him. Nick says he thought it would be better to master the confident step before moving on to learning the blurry step. He knows that if he can't master it, he won't be able to master the next step. The teacher praises the guy, saying, "Drive more quietly, you will go further." When Peterson is ready, then they will begin to teach the blurry step. He suggests that he now go to rest. The next day, Peterson is back training in the mountains, honing his confident stride as he moves from one stage to the next. He compares his training to an iceberg. Something small hides depths of knowledge. The guy is sure that it doesn't matter where you get knowledge from. Small and insignificant ones are still useful. It's these little things that fill this world, and together, they are knowledge. The technique itself implies 3 directions. The truth is always on the surface, moving in different directions. The steps form a circle and blossom into a complex geometric figure. Nick is close to self-forgetfulness. The energy of gold protects the body. The energy of the earth maintains health. And the energy of wood absorbs the energy of the environment, using the energy of water to remove all impurities outwards, which are burned by the energy of fire. Peterson lies in the snow, legs and arms outstretched, sighing loudly, his strength running out. Bob laughs hard, asking Nick if he even realizes how funny that sounds. The main character is extremely dissatisfied with the official's mockery. He asks him to stop the jokes, because he only learned to walk in the snow without traces, and did not achieve a consonant level of martial arts technique. Bob laughs, finally realizing that Nick only meant the skill of a confident step. But the doctors were so scared when they first heard it, and he still couldn't understand how his story could make so much noise. Peterson is furious. He shouts furiously that he sees how his interlocutor is having fun, and from that day on, Nick himself began to be called a snowmobile. The main character sits in the workshop with Bob and corrects errors in the latter's drawing. Recently, Nick has been busy writing his medical works. Of course, his teacher helped him in many ways, but he needs to make a conclusion on his own. He looks at past pictures of Bob, noticing that he draws with a brush, but his lines are much thinner and sharper than his pencil drawings. He is confused. Peterson asks if there is a skill that Bob cannot master, but he replies that he is not able to save the owner. Such words make Nick feel uneasy in his soul. He says that the servant's devotion to his teacher is amazing. What is the reason for it? Bob says that this does not concern Peterson, but by the way, he says that Nick has a special talent for martial arts, because you need to be strong to have knowledge of freezing from the 5th at the 4th stage of the 5 elements. The main character understands that the official is again trying to change the subject. Every time he does this, why does he always seem to be surrounded by an impenetrable wall when he tries to find out something? Nick thinks that this only piques his interest more, and asks why Bob is suddenly talking about him, because he so wanted to know their story with the teacher. Peterson speculates that the redhead is not a villain, such as the archer who terrorized the sky demon in the story, but a minor character, which is why no special information is given about him. He displeasedly reports that the gentleman's attention to him is excessive. He wonders if his threats to kill Nick are not enough to satisfy his curiosity, although he does not deny that there are people who like to be tortured. Peterson believes that he is being taken for a reprobate and laughs, saying that this is nonsense. Bob says that he can't work anymore because it involves a workload equal to that of 9 people, and not at all an attempt to find out anything about him. Nick thinks that he is too calm for a man who is so tired, as he says he is one big mystery. Where does he get the energy to do so many things?